Wait, I'll go live first.
Good morning, everyone. Kuya JP, can you hear me?
Yes,
All
loud and
right. So,
clear.
okay. Maraming salamat po sa pagsama sa amin ngayong Sabado. And we are now officially starting our course number 6 for the Filipino Science Hub Research University courses. So, this one, we will tell you about how to write a scientific paper. So, next slide, please. So we will be discussing in 3 parts. So I will kick off the talk with the importance of science communication. It will be followed by Mr. JP Oña on how to write a lab report. And then the more technical scientific paper writing will be discussed by our founder and CEO, Dr. Jeffrey Bunquin. So meron pong progression in the discussion of our topics. So we will be introducing the concept of science communication and then the most basic type of science communication, which is writing lab reports for high school students. And when you are a full bloom scientist, how to write a scientific paper. Next slide, please. So before we start our webinar, we kindly request all participants to turn off their videos and also please mute yourselves uh, to, uh, to facilitate the smooth run of our webinar. And also, if you want to ask questions, please reserve them at the end of the talk. Please use the raise hand button to raise your questions live after the webinar. And please don't record the session because the full video of the event will be posted in our YouTube channel. Next slide, please. So we will also give you a certificate of participation, and this will be posted in the Zoom chat box and the YouTube live comment sections. We will post a Google form link to issue you your certificates of participation for this session. For you to get the certificate of participation, you need to be a subscriber of the Filipino Science Hub YouTube channel and also a follower of our Facebook page, that's Filipino Science Hub. Next slide, please. All right, so to introduce the Filipino Science Hub, I'll give the floor to Dr. Jeff Bunquin. Sir Jeff.
All right, salamat Marty. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay, so muli, welcome po to the Filipino Science Hub. Ako po si Jeffrey Bunquin. I'm a Filipino scientist based here in Houston, Texas. So para po dun sa mga bago po na nagpa-participate dito sa ating webinar and who may not have been that familiar with Filipino Science Hub. So this is an online platform that we founded back in 2012. And its main intention is, or its main goal is to promote STEM education and the culture of research among Filipino teachers and students, both at the high school and at the college level. So at the moment, this volunteer organization is being run by Filipino scientists who are trained in various STEM areas. So nandyan po si Professor Dindy Yu, who's based in Kentucky, Marty Mateo, based in the Institute of Plant Breeding in the Philippines, Pee Oña, who's actually the head of our research department and who's handling all the activities or leading all the activities on FilSciHub Research University. We have Professor John Aguila from UP Los Baños, and we have Dr. Janice Aurelia, who is a food science expert based in Kansas here in the US. Okay, so main goal is to actually help build a stronger culture of innovation in the country. And the question of how do you build a culture? So first of which, kailangan po yung mastery ng ating mga guro at mga mag-aaral pagdating sa iba't ibang areas ng STEM, we have to be able to strengthen that, yung pundasyon. So dito po papasok yung ating programs on FilSciHub Education, which primarily aims to empower our teachers. Kasi po kapag ang ating mga guro ay mas may kapasidad na magturo ng STEM ng mas maayos at mas may kapasidad silang magbigay ng inspirasyon sa ating mga estudyante, there's a very high probability na mas marami tayong mga estudyante may impluwensyahan para maging scientists and engineers of the future. But then, ang culture po kasi ay nabubuo hindi lang sa pag-raise ng kamalayan at ng ating knowledge when it comes to STEM. We have to also be able to actualize. Kailangan na-apply natin kung ano yung natututunan natin. And dito po papasok yung ating programs on research. So dito po nakapaloob po ito sa ating Filipino Science Hub Research University. So dito naman po, nagbibigay kami ng basic training when it comes to our research. And then at the same time, we are building a community of Filipino scientists na amin pong inilalapit sa ating mga guro at mga mag-aaral. So yung mga programa po nito, mamaya po ay i-describe ng ating head na si Pee Oña. Okay, so ito po yung reason kung bakit the Filipino Science Hub has actually been growing. And for those of you who may not really be that familiar with our web events, over the past 12 months po, we have already conducted about 30 web events. And ito po ay binubuo ng teaching webinar. So meron po kami mga training courses para sa ating mga guro na pwede po ninyong i-apply sa panahon ng pagtuturo during the pandemic. Meron din po tayong career guidance talks for students and teachers. web lectures, most especially in Tagalog English. So yun pong language barrier, sinusubukan po namin tanggalin yan sa pamamagitan ng pagde-deliver po ng lectures ng mga scientists na kaparehas namin ng mga lectures po in different STEM areas. So dito po, para mas maraming makaintindi, bata man at matanda. Meron rin po tayong mga research webinars like this one, so formal research training, and then STEM special topics. So over the 30 events that we have actually conducted over the past 12 months, yan po ay nagsusuma po to about 71 expertise, 71 hours worth of expertise na aming na-render sa ating community. And all in all, ang ating pong live participants po sa lahat ng mga events na ito ay umaabot na po ng more than 15,000. So, and if you would actually multiply that with the number of training hours, you're looking at about almost 38,000 training hours rendered by our web events po. So lahat po ng aming mga events over the past 12 months are recorded and have been uploaded on our official YouTube channel. So kung meron po kayo mga na-miss dyan na tingin nyo ay makakatulong sa inyo, feel free to go to our YouTube channel kasi ito po ay freely accessible po para sa lahat, mga guro man at mga estudyante. Okay, so bakit po ba namin ito ginagawa? I'm gonna start to talk about FilSciHub education. So sinabi po namin kanina, teacher empowerment. So at the moment po, we have about 30,000 teachers who are following us on YouTube. So if those 30,000 teachers will teach for about 30 years on average, and then for each year, conservatively, kung 30 students ang kanilang matuturuan, you're looking at about 27 million students impacted. Like by the knowledge that they're gonna get from our training programs. And if only 1% of that 27 million will decide to become scientists and engineers in the future, maaabot na po natin yung required or more than what's required for the Philippines to have in terms of the number of scientists per million Filipino. So makakatulong po ito sa pag-unlad ng ating bansa. Okay, so talking about FilSciHub education. So as I have mentioned earlier, focus po tayo sa teacher empowerment and training. So from April to September of last year po, we have been conducting training webinars or teaching webinars for para sa ating mga guro. Ano ba yung mga tools na magagamit sa pag-transition sa new normal mode of teaching? Ano pa yung mga assessment strategies, for example, sa pwede nilang gawin, tips and best practices on how to actually keep teaching during, like from a distance, as equally engaging and impactful as, when you're teaching face-to-face. So ito po mga ito, ginawa po namin at meron po kami exciting na program na ilo-launch very, very soon. So watch out for the succeeding slides. Okay, so another very exciting program that we launched recently was FilSciHub's modules program. So in this particular effort, we have decided to hire paid interns who are Bachelor of Science in Math and Science teaching graduates from the University of the Philippines, and we asked them to create and curate teaching modules in the basic science courses, so biology, chemistry, and physics. And each of the modules that we roll out in these areas is comprised of a teaching guide, prescribed classroom activities, and yung pong ating mga problem set. So para may assessment mechanism rin. And for there to be materials na pwedeng gamitin ng ating mga mag-aaral is para ma-practice pa po yung mga lessons. So ito po, this is also gonna expand even further. So starting end of this month or June, we are also going to be rolling out teaching modules in general chemistry and also in mathematics. So mas lalawak na po ito. We're actually about to hire 10 paid interns for this modules program. So watch out for that. We're also going to start covering topics at the elementary level. So watch out for that po kasi we're partnering up with a couple of highly established institutions when it comes to this effort. So watch out for further announcements. Okay, so this is actually one...
The Filipino Science Hub is calling for applications for the pilot run of the STEM Teaching Fellowship Program. This program is devoted to early career educators to learn innovative and practical approaches to STEM teaching, experience mentorship from seasoned educators and scientists, and collaborate with fellow educators. Upon successful completion of this program, the teaching fellows are expected to generate educational materials that will be shared on a national platform.
Okay.
Yep, that's my voice right here.
Nagulat ako. Okay. So ito po yung program that we're launching quite soon. This is the Filipino Science Hub STEM Teaching Fellowship Program. And this is in collaboration with two big institutions in the Philippines. So the first of which is the Foundation for the Upgrading of the Standards of Education in the Philippines. So ito po ay foundation under the Lusutan Group of Companies. And then our second partner is the Philippine Normal University. So meron po kaming binuong training program para po sa ating mga guro. So we'll start with the webinar series po. So we have a total of about 8 courses that we offer. We freely offer all of our teachers in the country who are actually willing to learn. But then meron din po kaming special teaching fellowship program kung saan po ang ating mga guro ay pwede pong mag-apply sa amin at tuturuan po at i-mentor kayo ng mga educational leaders from PNU and from FUSE and also by scientists from FilSciHub. And then after that, meron po tayong internship program. So kung kayo po ay interesado dyan, mag-apply po kayo sa amin. The application is already open and we're accepting applicants on a rolling basis po. So if you would like to learn more about this program, please go to our website and to our Facebook page kasi nandyan po ang detalye. Medyo limited po ang slots dito. And I think like one very important aspect of this is that if you graduate from this free teaching fellowship po, we will also be providing you with CPD units. So yun po yung isang bagay na hindi namin nalagay muna dito. Pero that's actually one of the perks of going through this training course. Ito po ay free din, by the way. So yun po. Okay, so gaya nga po na sinabi namin, over the next 4 months, we have this campaign where we will be rolling out training courses po that are relevant to all STEM teachers po. You know, regardless of experience level. So we will be offering 4 pedagogical training courses po to be put together and delivered by PNU and FUSE. So ito po, specifically will cover strategies on how to create STEM modules. They will also talk about the underpinnings of STEM teaching, how to deliver virtual lectures. Kasi po medyo wala pa po masyadong linaw kung kailan tayo magbabalik sa face-to-face teaching. And then lastly, assessment strategies when it comes to STEM teaching. So mahalaga po ito. And then on the side naman po ng FilSciHub, dito naman po papasok yung ambag ng ating mga scientists. So from basic STEM teaching foundations, how do we elevate this? So dito na po papasok yung aming mga practical and innovative strategies when it comes to teaching STEM. So dito na po papasok yung webinar namin on focusing on the importance of effective STEM teaching. It'll be followed by practical and innovative STEM teaching. So ito po, dito na papasok yung mga tips from Filipino scientists who also happen to be educators. Pangatlo naman po, it's a training program on how to design lab experiments and virtual labs. So mga scientists po ang magtuturo nito sa inyo. And then lastly, research teaching at the primary and high school level. So ito pong ating ginagawa sa FilSciHub Research University ngayon is fairly extensive kasi we're offering about 8 to 9 formal training courses that you have to take. But then dun po sa ating mga guro, who would at least would like to learn the basics or would like to avail of a crash course training on research and how to actually teach that or introduce that to the students. Dito po bibigyan namin kayo ng isang medyo maiksi pero siksik na session. All right. So watch out for announcements po, and then we have already announced the first webinar for this series po. So it's happening Friday next week, and it's actually titled The Importance of Effective STEM Teaching. So yung pong we're gonna talk about several points emphasizing on the importance of effective STEM teaching, and those will be delivered by Filipino scientists po. So there's a total of 7 of them. Meron pa po mga madadagdag na speakers dyan. But then we encourage you to participate on May 22nd. Kasi sabi nga po namin, yung po mga makakatapos nung 8 training courses natin dito might be given CPD units. We're still ironing this out with Fuse, but that's actually one of the perks of participating in this webinar series. So watch out for that po and sign up. The information for signing up is on our official website and on our YouTube and Facebook channel. All right, JP.
All right. Thank you, Doc Jeff. And as Dr. Jeffrey mentioned, we have this main program, the FilSciHub Research University, which is also a webinar series focusing on scientific research on all levels. We try to cover as much as we can and to cover scientific research and all of its different aspects. So in this program, we will share some of the best practices when it comes to carrying out a research project. And we will also share our own research experiences as STEM practitioners when it comes to conducting research and some tips and advices on such. Next slide, please. Okay, so for FilSciHub Research University, we also have 8 mandatory courses. So 8 is kind of a magic number for us. So we start with research ideation, literature review, and now we are on to the 6th mandatory course for Research University, which is writing a scientific report, which will be delivered by myself, Dr. Jeffrey, and Marty Mateo. And ayun, pang-anim na po. And we will issue a completion certificates. We will issue a certificate of completion for those who will watch or participate in all of these mandatory courses. So yung mga nauna na po, mga previous courses are available on YouTube, and you can rewatch all of those recorded webinars and get a participation certificate kahit tapos na po. Okay? And next slide, please. And the mechanism for issuing the completion certificate is summarized in this info webinar last January on FilSciHub Research University. So we have devised a Google Classroom to monitor the progress of the participants in participating in this campaign, this FilSciHub Research University campaign. And ayun po, even dun po sa i-issue namin na certificate for this webinar, we will include the invitation link to the Google Classroom para po makaparticipate kayo and hopefully makakomplete ng program na FilSciHub Research University. So, ayan. Back to, okay. So, FilSciHub is always present in all of our platforms, mainly our website at www.filscihub.com, which contains all of our webinars, tutorials, modules, virtual labs, and some special features. And we are also always present on Facebook, where we have 30.5K followers and counting, and YouTube, and even on TikTok. So, ayan, you can reach us out through whatever channels you prefer. Okay, back to Marty.
All right, thank you, Kuya Jeff and Kuya JP. So we will now proceed to our webinar. But first, okay, so I will be starting off with the webinar and then followed by Kuya JP and then Kuya Jeff. So can I share my screen now, Kuya Jeff? No further announcements?
No, go for it.
Okay. All right, so before I start my talk, let me introduce myself. My name is John Marty Mateo, and I am a graduate of chemistry at UPLB, and I am a registered chemist I'm now employed at the Institute of Plant Breeding at UPLB as a university researcher, and I head the Analytical Chemistry Laboratory. So far I have 6 ISI or Scopus Index journal published and 2 peer-reviewed papers that is published. So for today, I will be discussing the importance of science communication. Mahalaga kasi na malaman muna natin yung basic of science communication before we go further to how to write scientific reports and also laboratory reports. So there are a lot of definitions with respect to science communication, but I will give you the definition from Burns and his colleagues in the journal titled Science Communication, a Contemporary Definition. This is actually the most cited science communication paper that I have scanned through. So according to Burns and his colleagues, or the group of Burns, science communication or SciComm may be defined as the use of appropriate skills, media, activities, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal responses to science. So meron siya ditong vowel analogy. For A, it should induce awareness, including familiarity to new aspects of science. So aside from to have an effective science communication, dapat makapag-raise tayo ng awareness about a certain specific topic about science na gusto nating i-put forward. And number 2, there should be an enjoyment or other effective responses in appreciating science as entertainment or art. So kapag sinabing merong enjoyment, so ito yung parang nakikita natin sa mga sitcoms like Big Bang Theory. So they add comedic situational analogy para maipakita yung science concepts. Hindi lang siya basta thorough or technical discussion of science, but there should be enjoyment or effective response from the audience. And also it should spark interest as evidenced by voluntary involvement with science or its communication. So aside from awareness and enjoyment, it should also spark the interest of your audience with respect to the scientific concept that you are communicating. And also opinions. So sabi dyan, the forming, reforming, and confirming of science-related attitudes. Opinions are actually equally important to scientific communication because kapag merong opinion na binibigay ang ating audience or co-scientist, pwede natin yung i-translate or pwede natin i-translate yung science communication natin in a more effective manner. So science communication is a two-way process, hindi lang lagi siyang galing sa scientist, pwede rin galing sa audience kung meron silang nakitang pwedeng i-improve dun sa way ng pag-communicate ng science. Pwede. So dapat this should be a two-way process. Hindi lang laging from scientist to the general public. Pwede rin from the general public to the scientist or the science communicators. And lastly, there should be an understanding of science, its content, processes, and social factors. So sabi ng group ni Burns, dapat daw one or more of the following responses ang ma-induce natin sa ating audience kapag meron tayong ginagawang science communication. And this is the important thing. Science communication may involve science practitioners, mediators, and other members of the general public, either peer-to-peer or between groups. So ibig sabihin nito, hindi lang mga scientists ang pwedeng gumawa ng science communication. Pwede actually yung general public if they can laymanize and effectively communicate the science to the general public or to the masses. Pwede silang maging science communicators. In fact, in UPLB, merong course kaming tinatawag na development communication where there is a major for science communication. They are not necessarily scientists, but they major on communication to deliver science to the general public effectively. So again, yung notion na scientist lang yung involved sa science communication is not true. Even normal people can do science communication. For example, nakarinig kayo ng balita about vaccine. Like say for example, mRNA vaccine kasi bagong type of vaccine yon, and you communicated it to your friends, to your peers, even though hindi ka scientist pero nakuha mo yung general theme of that science communication na nakuha mo from the TV or from the newspaper, you are also doing science communication by doing that. So hindi siya constrained to the scientist. Meron tayong mga communication graduates and other general public or general people or masses na pwedeng gumawa ng science communication. So, meron pa akong isang nilagay dito na definition from Emily Dawson of a professor in King's College London. Sabi niya, science communication is involved in developing government science policies, understanding relationships between the public and scientists, and creating science stories in mass media, as well as exploring how people learn about and engage with science. It is about communicating science and building bridges between the people involved in scientific research and different groups of the public. In other words, science communication bridges the gap of the scientific people to the general public by using communication tools or different platforms in communication to further diffuse the knowledge that came from the scientific community. So kapag sinasabi dito na yung science communication, ini-influence niya yung general public. Not just the general public but also government science policy. So meron ding involved na political involvement here. So hindi lang yung general public but also policy makers. So to have an effective science communication is the key for better understanding of public with science and also our policymakers with science. So bakit importante ang science communication? So bakit importante ang science communication for scientists or between scientists? For example, you presented your work in a conference, in a seminar, or a scientific gathering. Number one, it builds your reputation as a scientist and makes you visible and known in your respective field. So kapag nag-present ka ng isang topic sa sinabi ko nga sa mga scientific gatherings, or nakapag-publish ka ng isang scientific article in a certain field, kunwari sa akin in agricultural chemistry, makikilala ka ng scientific community as a contributor to that respective field. And consequentially, it gives you a chance to collaborate with other players in your field of expertise, especially when you communicate your research in conferences, seminars, and scientific gatherings, and also in publications. So kapag na-build mo na yung sarili mo in that respective field or na-communicate mo na yung science mo to your peers or to the scientific community, it will give you a chance to become more known or well-known or para maging point person ka din in that respective field of yours. And also, communication with experts in your fields can also result to answered questions in research. Sometimes meron tayong mga ginagawang experiments na hindi nag-agree ang results sa published data or hindi natin makuha-kuha yung results na gusto natin. Kapag na-present natin ito sa mga conferences or seminars or simple talks with fellow scientists, pwedeng makakuha tayo ng sagot kung bakit hindi natin makuha yung gusto nating makuhang data. Maybe meron kang na-miss na step or maybe may kailangan kang idagdag na reagent or idagdag na step. These people in the scientific arena can give you that feedback that can enhance or correct your scientific research. So mahalaga talaga yung scientific research within the scientific community. Also, doon mo mapapatunayan na your research is reproducible. Ibig sabihin, pwede siyang gayahin ng ibang researchers. And if it's reproducible and repeatable, ibig sabihin, maganda yung body of knowledge na nakuha mo kasi nare-repeat siya ng ibang mga scientists in their respective labs. So, science communication within the scientific community is very important. And why is science communication important to the general public? Number one, if you have an effective science communication, it improves the population's beliefs about science. So meron tayong mga myths na pinapaniwalaan, especially in the Philippines. Marami tayong mga ganyan na walang scientific basis pero ginagawa natin because sabi sa kasabihan, effective daw yon, or sabi ng nanay at tatay natin ay effective daw yon. Pero kapag effectively na-communicate mo yung science behind it, mag-i-improve yung population's belief about science. So ibig sabihin, meron na ngayong kung maiko-communicate mo sa general public ng maayos yung science behind or the science behind the concepts dun sa mga myths na yon, merong part ng public or merong part ng masses na maniniwala dun sa science behind it, and it will improve the population's belief about science. And also, consequentially, kapag marami nang naniniwala sa science or marami nang naniniwala sa concepts of science and the scientific method and other things related to science, makaka-generate ka na ngayon ng social acceptance. In the advent of technology and social media, mahirap na ngayon magkaroon ng acceptance yung science. Actually, dahil sa mga over-sensationalized news, fake news, and other materials na nakikita natin sa social media such as Facebook, Twitter na hindi naman verified, nagkakaroon ngayon ng hindi magandang acceptance yung mga scientists kasi lagi silang pinuput into bad light ang mga scientists. So nagkakaroon ng general na bad social acceptance ang mga scientists. But through effective science communication, if we can communicate our science well to the general public, we will generate a we can generate a better social acceptance. And also, if we have a better social acceptance, it will also improve public and moral trust. So nowadays, masakit mang sabihin, and I'm overly emphasizing this, mas pinaniniwalaan pa ngayon ang mga social celebrities, TV personalities, etc., and other social media influencers kesa sa mga scientists. Like, for example, the use of ivermectin as a drug for COVID-19. It is overly sensationalized by the mainstream media, and we tend to neglect what the scientific community is telling. The scientific community is telling you from 60 clinical trials around the world that the effect of ivermectin to COVID-19 patients is inconclusive. So ibig sabihin, wala siyang epekto. Hindi ma-conclude kung meron ba talaga siyang epekto or wala. So if we generate social acceptance through good science communication or effective science communication, it will also improve improve public and moral trust to the scientific community. So that is the goals of effective science communication. And lastly, since we have already sinabi ko nga po sa inyo, consequential itong mga steps na to. If we improve public and moral trust, we can generate political support for science. Remember, the politicians are more concerned about the public rather than the scientists, because yung public sila yung bumoboto eh. Hindi naman ang liit-liit ng science community eh. The general public is what they please. And if the public is pleased with the scientific community, it will generate political support for science. Kung ang public ay may support or may trust sa scientific community, it will generate political support for science, such as funding for breakthrough researches, and also funding for research that is timely and impactful in the society. So sinabi ko nga po kanina, this is a consequential thing. Dapat simulan natin sa effective science communication para makapa-generate tayo ng political support. It should start with the public. So kapag nakuha na namin scientific community natin, scientific community yung trust and ng public, it will follow na yung mga politicians will listen to us more. So it should start with effective science communication. And this is a published paper from Capel and Holman entitled Why Science Communication and Does It Work? A Taxonomy of Science Communication Aims and a Survey of the Empirical Evidence from Frontier Communication. So yan po. Napaka-importante ng scientific communication para ma-put forward ang scientific community sa ating country. So hindi lang po basta ito role ng scientist. Pwedeng role din to ng communicators. So kung paano nila i-bring into light or i-bring into fame yung mga science concepts, scientific discoveries within the community, etc. So Meron din tayo mga different types of scientific communication based on the learners, yun sa kagustuhan ng learners. So before that, let me engage you with an activity. Can you please go to menti.com? Ay, sorry po. Na-cancel ko. So menti.com and the code is 9587-9480. Tapos sagutan nyo lang po yung, wait, present ko po to. Sagutan nyo lang po yung tanong na, it's loading. Ayan. Where do you usually get science-related information and breakthroughs? So I'll give you 2 minutes to answer this Menti survey. Titingnan po natin kung saan kayo nakakakuha ng news from or ng information about science. So merong Google Scholar, School, Google, yeah. Earthshaker. Yung Earthshaker parang social media page siya sa Facebook if I'm not mistaken. PubMed, Science News Org, journals, YouTube, internet, Facebook. Sige po, let's populate the survey.
So ang dami palang nag-google, which is good.
At saka maraming nag-Google Scholar, which is good.
Yeah.
Ayan. So Kuya JP, saan ka ba kumukuha ng mga interesting scientific or related?
Usually nakaka-cross ko lang yan sa social media din. Oo.
Social media. So
Kasi
mostly,
parang if you follow like the right set of people on social media, you can get like verified information and breakthroughs in science.
that's correct. So we can still have 30 seconds para makita po natin yung mga sagot ng ating mga participants. Si Kuya Jeff, where do you usually get your science news or articles?
Ako kasi medyo ano eh. Work kasi because like I mean,
So work.
I do science full time. So you know whenever I go to work, I essentially talk about science with my colleagues. Kasi I'm in a research and development headquarters of a company. So essentially nakakaano na siya. Nakakaburo siya kasi puro science yung usapan na natin.
Actually, kapag may big news sa science, for sure big news din siya sa ano nyo, sa
Coffee rooms.
Nyo, yeah, sa conference room. So dun pa lang malalaman mo na kung anong latest sa science. So there you have it. Most of our participants answered Google Scholar, and social media, which is quite good. But of course, if you use social media for science-related information, you should consider the fact, or you should consider the sources of that social media. Or tama si Kuya JP kanina, you should follow the right people or the right groups para makuha yung authentic science information at hindi yung mga fake news. So yung mga nagsagot ng Google, I guess it's very broad. So maganda yung nagsagot ng Google Scholar because these are scholarly articles na makikita natin freely from the internet. So end ko lang po yung presentation and I'll go back to my presentation. So bakit ko po kinuha yung pulso ng masa, sabi nga, dun sa kung saan kayo kumukuha ng science-related news? Because there are different types of learners. Meron tayong tinatawag na visual learners, meron tayong tinatawag na audio learners, meron din tayong audio-visual learners. So saan ba natin makukuha yung gusto nating science-related news? Depende sa type of learner that we are. So unang-una, syempre yung published scientific articles. Meron tayong dalawang types of published scientific articles. Yung una, yung conservative type or the technical type, yung scientific journal articles, patents, comprehensive reviews, and books. So ito, kung paano gumawa ng scientific journals and articles and also laboratory reports, mamaya i-discuss yan ni na Kuya JP. So I will not discuss itong mga ito, pero ito yung mga more technical types. Ito yung mga makukuha nyo actually sa Google Scholar. And the other one are popular articles or articles in the newspaper like news features about science, magazines, and blogs. These are the more laymanized terms and are intended for general public. Ito naman for the scientific community. So since we treat our classrooms as scientific community, more or less we are required to do scientific journal writing, laboratory reports, and comprehensive reviews. But for popular articles which is intended to the mass or to the people with no prior knowledge with science or not inclined with science, they can get their information from popular articles, news articles, magazines, and blogs. Marami po nito sa, if you search Google, ayan nga po, sinabi magandang tool ang Google. I-type nyo lang po top 10 blogs or magazines for science. Lalabas na po dyan yung Science News Org. Kanina nakita ko dun sa merong Science News Org, Science Today, Science Daily, etc. So lahat po yan are types of popular articles. So ang pinagkaiba lang po nito is the intended audience. So ang intended audience nito is more on the technical side, the scientific community. This one is the general public. So if kung hindi mo naman gusto ang pagbabasa or hindi ka masyadong visual learner or not into reading, hindi ka masyadong natututo kapag nagbabasa ka, you can alternatively listen to them through scientific podcast. So marami po tayong scientific podcast na pwedeng pakinggan habang kunwari naglilinis kayo ng bahay or may iba kayong ginagawa like nagkakape or nag-aalmusal, nagla-lunch. Ito po yung mga top scientific podcast na meron tayo. So actually, some of these are available in Spotify. So for example, yung Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, ito yung about solar system, galaxies, etc. If you want science of foods, yung gastropod, pwede nyo pakinggan. Blow Your Mind is some trivias and others, some trivia science na ipinapaliwanag nila. So marami po yan. Marami kayong pagpilian. It is, again, i-search nyo lang po yung Google ng top scientific podcast. So makikita nyo na din po dyan yung mga matataas yung ratings and also matataas yung viewership, listenership. Hindi pala viewership, listenership. Kasi nagli-listen ka lang sa kanya, hindi ka naman nag-review sa kanya. But if you are an audio-visual learner, you can check out YouTube channels or TikToks. So sa YouTube channels, ito po yung most subscribed na scientific YouTube channels or YouTube creators. So si Visos has around 17 million followers. Itong In a Nutshell, Curse Gisat, around 15 million followers. ASAP Science, around 9.65 million followers. Smarter Everyday, around 10 million followers. And of course, don't forget our platform, Filipino FilSciHub. We have around
10 million.
10 million, no, 10,000 followers. So if you enjoy learning science na may audio-visual team, you can check out YouTube or TikTok. Marami na rin po ngayong TikTok content creators na nagbibigay ng scientific na content. So, i-search nyo lang po yung ano nga ba yung hashtag natin before sa TikTok. Actually, yung FilSciHub may TikTok din eh. For
Learn on TikTok.
Learn on TikTok, yan. Learn on TikTok. Tapos meron ding hashtag EduTalk. If you want for a general theme for education, that's hashtag EduTalk. Makikita nyo na po doon yung mga important materials with education. So you see different platforms, different types of science communication, but actually the objective is one. It's just one. The science communication the science communication specialist community wants the public to be involved in science, or wants to popularize science to the general public. So it's good that we are seeing millions of subscribers for this types of science communication contents in YouTube and also in podcast, because nakikita natin na malaki din pala yung audience ng scientific community. Hindi lang siya little. So marami pa ring naniniwala sa science. So before I end my talk, let me give you this quote. Science isn't finished until it is communicated. It is a quote from Sir Mark Walport, UK Government Chief Advisor for Science. So again, wag po nating hayaan na yung mga results ng ating experiments or results ng ating studies will just sit on your laboratory notebooks. If you don't want to publish it, just make a blog out of it. So kung may interesting kayong nakita, pwede kayong magsulat ng vlog, pwede nyo siyang i-video, pwede nyo siyang i-podcast or pag-usapan together with a colleague and i-record nyo. And if it's really something interesting and it's something na novel, maganda po na i-publish nyo siya sa scientific as a scientific article. So scientific results that sits on the lab ay actually yung lab nyo lang ang makakaalam. Walang ibang makakaalam. Bahalay nyo yung na-discover nyo is a Nobel Prize worthy na result. So hindi nyo malalaman kasi hindi nyo i-publish. Minsan kasi we are discouraged kapag kumbaga hindi yung ine-expect nating result yung nakuha natin dun sa mga experiments natin. But results like that can actually be a new idea or a new result for that specific problem. So hindi porket hindi kayo nag-agree with other studies ay mali na yung study niyo. So either you revisit your methodology, or talagang kapag ni-revisit yun na yung methodology niyo and tama naman, baka talagang kailangan yung i-publish na may iba talagang result kapag ginagawa niya yung ganong experiments. So with that, I conclude my talk. Thank you for listening, and I turn the floor to Kuya JP.
Ayan. Thank you, Marty, for that very inspiring and very informative lecture. So I'm just gonna share my screen. So ayan, magandang umaga po sa lahat. We are I think 300 now in the audience. Okay. Naglalag siya konti. Okay. So ayan, magandang umaga po, and we are joined by people from all around the country, all the way from Ilocos to Zamboanga, and we even have international participants today. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. So building on what Marty has started, so sisimulan po natin dun sa pinaka-basic na laboratory reporting. So this is how to write a lab report, and specifically this is targeted towards the high school students. Okay, because doing a lab report is our entry point to making a scientific paper, and it is also our entry point towards scientific communication. So before anything else, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Pee Oña, and I am currently the head of research of Filipino Science Hub, and I graduated from UP Los Baños with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. And I also worked as a chemist at Petron up until 2016, and after that I continued with my master's here in Finland, where I'm based right now, and I continued on with doctoral with PhD. So ayan, so ngayon po, I'm doing my doctoral studies here at Obo Academy University here in Finland. And throughout my career as a chemist, my research interests include analytical chemistry, electrochemistry, and electrocatalysis, which is the topic of my PhD right now. Okay, so let us first start with the most basic question: what is a lab report? So, sa mga general science or sa mga chemistry, high school chemistry courses po natin, sometimes back in the day, nung wala pang pandemic, we are used to having laboratory experiments, and after that, our teachers require us to produce a laboratory report for that experiment, and that report is a document that discusses exactly what we did in the experiment, and including the results and what we have learned from that activity. Now, the purpose of a lab report, as basic as and as simple as it may seem, is very important. The purpose of a lab report is um, not only to prove or to show what we have learned in the experiment, but it is also a way to share the information that we have gathered in a scientific investigation to other scientists or even our classmates. No? So essentially, a lab report is a basic form of scientific communication. Kagaya nga ng sinabi ni Marty na parang we communicate the data that we have gathered from the specific set of procedures that we carried out, so that it becomes reproducible, so that other scientists can replicate it and build on the data that we have gathered. So the writing style for a laboratory report is in the technical writing style. So it's a technical document, and it requires a certain level of accuracy and clarity. And as such, it should be logical and concise. So I will give you an example here. So when you're writing in the technical style, we avoid lengthy explanations, and also omit the use of pronoun like I, we, or us. So for example, instead of saying I took 5 milligrams of salt and added it to the mixture. So let's take away the pronoun and make it a bit more concise. So let's just say 5 milligrams of salt was added to the mixture, so that it's more concise, shorter, at tinanggal po natin yung pronoun, which is I, without losing the essence of the statement. So nandun pa rin yon, 5 milligrams of salt was added to the mixture. So yun naman po, pangalawa naman po, we should observe, as with any type of writing, we should observe proper grammar and punctuation, and avoid the use of slang words like cool, or no matter how cool the laboratory experiment is. So let us refrain from using slang like awesome, or God forbid, shook. Okay. So the basic structure of a laboratory report varies from teacher to teacher. Actually, it depends on the teacher, but the basic structure would include a title page, abstract, introduction, procedure, results and discussion, conclusion, and if applicable, the literature cited or the references. Okay, and we will discuss this in lightning fashion. Okay. So first off, we have the title page. And this includes, of course, the title of the experiments, your name or your lab partners, the date of the experiment, and probably also the date submitted to the professor or the teacher. So as with the, as I've said previously, the experiment title should be short and concise. but also descriptive. So dito, we also we also have some rules. We try to avoid the use of articles like the or a or an. So we try to omit that as much as possible, like in this example. Instead of saying an investigation on the effect of varying temperatures on the pH of water, we can just say effect of temperature on water's pH. So very short, but very descriptive. Now, the abstract is perhaps for high school laboratory reports, this is probably not a requirement, or you can skip this step. But if we're going to do like a mini thesis in high school or a scientific paper, like a basic scientific paper, you might want to include an abstract, which is a brief summary of the topic, the procedure, the most crucial results, and the main conclusions of an experiment. And it serves to describe a scientific investigation so that yung mga magbabasa po or the readers of the abstract can quickly scan if what you did is of interest to them, so that because scientists and researchers like tore through like a very large volume of scientific papers. So yung abstract po is one way to cut the time and quickly scan whatever sources a researcher gathered. And it's usually a short paragraph which comes first in a lab report or a scientific paper. Okay, so let us start with the introduction. So probably many of you might have already prepared a laboratory report, and you must prepare an introduction part, which states the objective and the purpose of the experiment. And it provides a brief background on the topic and contains the main hypotheses of the experiment. So for laboratory, high school laboratory experiments, so usually meron tayong laboratory manual where we derive the introduction part. So hindi na natin kailangang we don't need to undergo a rigorous research on the introduction kasi it's provided already in the laboratory manual. What we only need to do is to paraphrase the introduction there and put it on our report without losing the essential elements, which is the objective, the brief background of the experiment, and the hypothesis of the experiment. So these are the three most important elements of an introduction. So wag po natin siyang kakalimutan. So I have here an example. So this experiment is about how anthocyanins and pH help determine leaf color. So dito po, given po yung brief explanation about pigmentation in leaves, what compounds are responsible for that. So yung green color, alam natin galing yan sa chlorophyll. But for plants which do not have green leaves, so meron po mga pigments yan like carotenoids and anthocyanins. And this experiment was explored how anthocyanins affect the color and how the pH affect the anthocyanins, because they tend to vary in color depending on the pH. So yan. So makikita natin this is just one paragraph, but na-include niya yung lahat ng essential elements of the laboratory experiment. Okay? So heading on to a procedure. So this is also included in the laboratory manual, and it mentions what you use to perform the experiments, the apparatus, the essential quantities that you use. And you just need to paraphrase it and make it as descriptive as possible so that another scientist or another student, probably some next school year, makikita ng student tong experiment na to, so that that person can reproduce the experiment and generate like a comparable data and build on what results that you have gathered. So it also should be detailed enough so that you can show your teacher or your professor that you have a good understanding of the experimental procedure. So usually kami po nung college, before starting a laboratory experiment, we are required to produce a pre-lab report, which contains this procedure part, so that the teacher is confident that we know what we are doing. So what we are going to perform, what reagents or glasswares that we need to use, and ayun, so para ma-assess ng teacher na okay, alam ng bata na to yung mga gagawin. And this is also very important for safety, because if we do not know what the exact steps that we need to undertake, so baka may mga hazardous chemicals na involved dun sa experiment. So I have here an example building on the topic that I gave. So few leaves were boiled, and then a part of that boiled mixture was added with vinegar and ammonia solution. So after nun, tinake note yung volumes of added ammonia or vinegar, and then tinake note po yung change in color depending sa volume ng dinagdag na reagent. Okay, so ito very simple experiment. So we can also apply this to Philippine plants, kasi ito I just took this from a international article. So maraming mga plants po sa Pilipinas na hindi green yung color ng leaves. So even yung talbos ng kamote may mga pigmentation siya, or alugbati. So pwede natin gawin din po ito sa mga bahay natin, because these are home-based experiments. So very basic po yung mga materials needed. So you only need like cups to measure the volume, and then you only need like an eyedropper for the volume of the added vinegar or ammonia solution. So ito pwedeng nasa bahay lang natin, nasa cabinet lang natin. So we can try this out sa mga bahay natin. Or if you're a teacher, this might be a good laboratory experiment, or sort of, in this time of pandemic. Now for the results, so usually the results or discussion may be combined together, but if the teacher requires you to only have a separated results part of the report, you should just put there the data and observe gathered from the experiment. And these data, or the quantitative data, can be presented in the form of tables and graphs, and not only quantitative data, but also qualitative data. And please, if you're preparing tables and graphs, please make sure that they are complete with titles and labels, and the unit of measurement for the quantity that you investigated. The results also contain the mathematical calculations. Let's say nag-prepare kayo ng solution, there's a good chance that the teacher will require you to put how you calculated the concentrations or the masses of the reagents that you added. So ilalagay niyo po yun dito, and only include the recorded information, because at this point your you're not expected to give your own interpretation on the observations. You're only stating the results and observations, because that will be discussed in a different section, which is the discussion. So ito, just an example. So we have here a table on this experiment. So we have the drops of the reagent, the ammonia or vinegar. So tinake note natin yung number of drops where it turned from blue to blue-green, and then blue-green all the way to green. Okay? And this is for red cabbage sample. Okay? So on the acidic side naman, when you put vinegar, so ito parang tinuloy lang nila to from green. So ibabalik nila sa blue-green by adding vinegar. So this is base and this is acid. So from green, it turned to blue-green again, and then to blue, dark blue, purple, and lastly, pink. Okay? So makikita natin, talagang nagbabago-bago yung kulay depending on the pH of the reaction mixture. Okay? So the next part is the discussion, which contains your interpretation of the data and analysis. So this one contains the data and also determines how the data supports the initial hypothesis. So parang dito natin sasagutin kung yung data natin ay nag-agree dun sa hypothesis na sinet out natin sa simula. And also, if there are deviant results or unexpected results, dito po natin ilalagay yung possible explanations on why they were encountered. Okay? And of course, let us remember to adhere to the technical writing style. So we always write in the third person and in the passive form. Okay? So parang dito, I will give an example. So ito, ano siya? Passive form, and let's give an example. Was as the ammonia solution was added. So hindi mo sasabihin na I added the ammonia solution. So it's third person and passive voice. Okay? The ammonia solution was added to the cabbage water. Okay? And also refrain from stating opinions or emotions. So you can say that I was surprised that the cabbage water changed color from green to blue, let's say. So yeah, so let's refrain from putting our own opinions or emotions on the discussion part. Okay? So makikita natin dito yung mga essential points or the essential results, and also the conclusions, yung mga intermediate conclusions natin. So sabi niya, therefore, in the presence of a base, the anthocyanins change to a green color. Okay? And in the presence of vinegar, which is an acid, the pH began to decrease, and then in the presence of acid, the anthocyanins turn pink. So makita natin, very simple lang yung observations, because this is just a high school laboratory experiment. Okay? So doon naman po sa conclusion, very brief lang din po, contains the brief summary of what was investigated in the experiment, and states how the data supports the hypothesis and explains briefly why deviations were observed or encountered. Siguro mali yung volume na nadagdag, or parang faulty yung equipment, and even kung hindi masyadong maganda yung data natin, we can make a very good report by stating exactly like the reasons why unexpected results were were encountered. So kung ako yung teacher at nakita ko na kahit hindi maganda yung data nung naipresent nung estudyante, nung bata, makikita natin yung galing niya on how he presented or discussed like unexpected results or deviations from what was expected. So the conclusion basically mirrors the introduction because doon natin sasagutin yung objectives, the hypothesis, and how we arrived at a certain conclusion. Yun nga lang po, this section includes the major findings and their implications. So from the introduction to the conclusion, yung laboratory report po is usually very brief, 1 to 2 pages. And I just want to make an appeal to all the teachers kasi sa atin parang it's always the longer the better. But for a laboratory report, so ang pinaka-importante lang po is to put the most essential elements because we try to make it as brief and concise, logical as possible. So hindi po kailangan yung very flowery words or very highfalutin terms. So kailangan lang po may pakita ng mga estudyante, ng mga bata that they learned, that they understood what the experiment was all about and derived useful learnings on that activity. So ayun. Ito example lang po ng conclusion. So ayan. Taking from table 1, the presence of bases make the anthocyanins turn green, and in the presence of acids, anthocyanins turn pink. Anthocyanins are present in many leaves and affect their perceived color. So relating to the background information that we stated in the introduction. But as leaf color change as the pH of the leaf changes, and the set of pigments therefore can give leaf different colors depending on the leaf's pH. So makikita natin very simple lang yung conclusion dahil very simple lang din po yung experiment. Okay? So I just want to stress this out to our high school students present in this forum na yung experiments po natin, yung conclusions natin should only be substantiated with the activities or the experiments that we performed. So wag nating dagdagan ng mga bagay na hindi naman natin ginawa. Okay? So we just take our conclusion from the results that we ourselves collected and observed. Okay? So wag na po tayong magdagdag ng added extra just to make it longer. Okay? Doon lang po tayo sa specific objectives and the learnings from the activity. Okay? Now, yung reference po for high school laboratory reports are most likely not needed, but if so, you can list here the previous studies on the topic and other relevant sources if you did like prior research for that experiment. And ayun nga po, hindi siya ganun ka most likely not needed in high school lab reports. Okay? So here are my key takeaways for this part of the lecture. So a lab report is a technical document. So it is written in the technical writing style, and it summarizes the details and results of an experiment aimed at testing a hypothesis. And it communicates the data gathered from a laboratory experiment to other scientists or persons so that they can reproduce and obtain more information based on the same set of procedures that we followed. And it also follows a prescribed structure and format. So makikita natin na very fixed po yung structure and the format, yung passive voice and omitting the pronouns like I, we, or you. So third person siya and passive voice. Okay? So ito, idadagdag ko lang po because we received an email from one teacher, probably a high school teacher. Um, she didn't reply to our email to post this question, but this is her actual name, si Teacher Trisha. And she was asking, how do I encourage students to engage themselves more in doing laboratory reports? So ito parang nas-struck po kami kasi parang um, as simple as it is parang kinatatamaran pa ng mga estudyante na gumawa ng laboratory reports. And kasi nga medyo trivial siya, and sometimes it can be perceived as a boring activity doing a laboratory report because you already did the experiments, you already knew what the experiment was all about, and after that, now you have to do the report, like repeating all the steps again. So if I can just give you like some insights on how to make it more interesting for students. So probably as teachers, we can hammer in or stress the benefits or the importance of doing lab reports to our students, because there are essential benefits of doing laboratory reports, because it is a training for students for the careers that they want to make later in life. So sinasabi nga natin, yung technical writing skills is developed in doing a laboratory report, kasi importante po yan later in life when students need to prepare like a comprehensive report about anything. So yung passive voice, parang yung formats. So importante po yung malaman at a very young age, and matrain po sila in being objective and impartial on the results. So merong tinatawag na extrinsic rewards in doing lab reports. So extrinsic meaning it's coming from outside. So probably this can come in the form of completion of the results or the class requirements. So pag natapos mo yung lab report, so mako-complete mo yung course, and possibly makakakuha ka ng high grade if you did a really good lab report. So that's for the extrinsic rewards. But mas from studies po by psychologists, yung intrinsic rewards or the rewards that the experiencer or the person doing the activity like derived from within himself. So it's intrinsic. So kasama po dito yung technical writing skills, as I've mentioned, yung objectivity or impartiality when it comes to looking at data. So kailangan devoid po yan of our own opinions or our own biases. So yung paggawa din po ng laboratory report also develops critical thinking, and if you have a group mate or a teammate, it fosters teamwork and responsibility. Okay, and we also need to be very exact with our statements. So it develops accuracy and exactness among our students, and also perseverance and self-esteem. Kasi kung mag-fail po yung experiment, so as teachers, it is our responsibility to like encourage them to try more and be better next time. So meron din po ditong in terms of mindset naman, we can like develop in our students the growth mindset, which is like 180 degrees opposite of the fixed mindset, which is just static or stagnant. So I mean, people might say like, I'll never be good at this, hindi ako I'm not a science person, and I'll never learn this stuff, or it is what it is, or I am what I am. I cannot change. So that is a fixed mindset. Now, what we want the students to have is a growth mindset, which strives for learning and continuous and constant improvement. So pwede nating sabihin sa mga estudyante, you might not get it now, but you can improve. You can improve and yourself or improve the system and be better next time. So ito yung iiwan ko lang po na message sa mga estudyante natin, sa mga teachers natin to uh, never stop learning. Okay? So ang kailangan po natin is a growth mindset, and kung hindi natin makuha, let's just try again. Kung hindi maganda yung experiment, so let's figure out, be critical thinkers, and think about what went wrong and what can be improved next time. Okay? So, ngayon po, iiwan ko yung question to our, if there are teachers or educators present in the audience, maganda rin po na malaman po natin or marinig natin yung inputs nyo. So, the question is, how can we encourage our students to engage themselves more in doing laboratory reports, as trivial and as simple as they are? So, if you can just share us your ideas and in the comments, so we can probably read it at the end of the webinar. So, ayun, I would like to end my part of the presentation with this question. So, maraming salamat po. My name is Pee Oña again, and I think I can hand over the screen now to Dr. Jeffrey.
All right, maraming salamat, JP. Okay, muli po, ako po si Jeffrey Bunquin. I'm based here in Houston, Texas. So gabi na po dito. Kung nakikita po ninyo bintana ako, madilim na. So by the way, before ako mag-transition dito sa ating talk about, how to write an effective scientific paper, I would just like to emphasize po yung a couple of key messages that Marty and JP shared earlier. So the first of which was the importance of science communication. Ay po mga science sa loob ng mga laboratorio, whenever we do our work, ang intention po dyan ay hindi po para isulat lang sa libro or sa lab notebook namin kung ano yung ginagawa namin. If we are actually part of academic institutions or research organizations na ang mandato po ay i-share ang lahat ng aming natututunan, kasama po ng aming mga trabaho ay ang pagsusulat ng reports para po makommunicate iyan sa ating sa lahat po ng tao sa mundo na may interest dun sa area of study. So yun po yung sinasabi ni Martin na it doesn't end in the lab, it doesn't hindi po dapat ating and for us to be able to effectively write scientific reports, it's also very important that at a very early age ay masanay po ang ating mga estudyante. And saan po ba yun magsisimula? I believe yung first tab po natin or first experience natin at scientific report writing starts in high school, di ba, no? So yung po tinuro ni JP, the basics and best practices of laboratory report writing, there's a reason kung bakit po namin inuna yon bago tayo pumunta dito sa aking talk. Kasi before tayo mag-touch on the more technical aspects of it, kailangan fundamental. So sabi nga po nila, dapat matuto muna tayo maglakad bago tayo tumakbo. So para po sa mga guro natin, alam po namin na hindi po kasi madali magturo ng writing, first and foremost. At lalong-lalo na po kung yung foundation, understanding, and skill at doing it, hindi rin po natin gamay tayo pong mga guro. Kasi paano po natin tuturuan ng mga estudyante natin ng bagay na hindi po tayo masyadong hasa kung paano ito gawin. So ito po, though I believe majority of our audience members right now are teachers, kahit po anong daming lectures ang ibigay namin sa inyo, kahit gaano po kadaming tips ang ibigay namin sa inyo, at kahit po spoon feed namin kayo, wala pong masyadong impact itong content na aming ibinibigay kung hindi pa rin po niyo ipapractice. So kapag po kayo ay nagre-require ng report sa inyong mga estudyante, be an active participant. So hindi niyo naman po kailangan magsulat ng report as part of your activities, but then yun pong active feedback provision. So pagka po nagsulat ng report ang inyong mga estudyante, hindi lang po yun para siguro bigyan nyo lang ng marka, no? Hopefully you can actually read the reports intently and provide them with feedback. O sa mga estudyante, constructively, dapat po hindi tayo masyadong matari sa pagbibigay that could disengage our students kasi kung mas nasindak po sila sa writing, paano nila yan may enjoy later on in life. So let's try to give feedback as constructively as possible po. Ano? Okay, ang haba ng pasakali ko. Okay, so ito po yung third part, and what I will talk about is actually the art of writing an effective scientific paper. So, bakit ba natin ginagawa ito? Ba't tayo nagsusulat ng scientific papers? Sabi nga kanina ni Marty, hindi lang po ang science communication is not only intended for scientists. Ito po ay intended sa lahat ng magbasa at sa lahat ng pwede mag-benefit sa mga resulta at impormasyon na ating nakalap sa ating research. So it's not only for submitting it to a journal publication na kailangan basahin ito ng tinatawag nating peer reviewers, yung mga kasabayan nating mga scientists na mag-approve kung tama ba or kung meron bang substance ang ating article na sinulat. Kung meron po tayong kahit mga tambay sa kalye na gusto pong matuto dun sa ating inaaral, dapat po yung ating pagsusulat ng scientific paper, in the most ideal sense, ay hopefully ma-appreciate din po ng mga tao who may not experts in the art. So dapat po medyo may certain level of understanding na meron sila makuha kapag po nabasa nila ang inyong scientific article. So yun po para sa akin ang totoong marka ng maayos na pagsusulat ng scientific report. Okay, but before I actually talk about this, I would like to reintroduce myself. So baka po nagsasawa na kayo, pero for the benefit of those who may not be very familiar with me, bakit ba ako decide to actually to cover this topic? So just like JP and Marty, I was also educated in UPLB. So I was a graduate of chemistry noong 2000 in chemistry from the University of Alberta in Canada. And then after grad school in 2013, I have actually joined a government research laboratory here in the US, where I performed catalysis and materials development research for the US Department of Energy. So yun naman po para sa gobyerno ang ating ginawa doon. And then in 2017, 3.5 years ago naman po, I actually joined the research and development headquarters of a major chemical company here in the US. So dun po sa 14 years po of R&D experience ko, including my thesis years in UPLB and then my graduate research, I have actually published a total of about 15 international peer-reviewed publications po. So 411 citations, H and I-10 indices of 12 and 13 respectively. Pero ngayon po, since ako po yung nasa industry na at karamihan po ng aming mga research programs are actually what they call this classified, hindi proprietary po. So much of my writing activities have actually focused on inventions. So writing patents and inventions. And bakit po ba ako confident mag-talk about this? So I have written a lot of papers already. And yun naman po mga articles na sinusulat ko have actually been noticed over the years. So for example po, in January 2017, this article that I wrote while I was still in Chicago was featured at the Journal of Catalysis. So it's a global journal in catalysis. And for every issue, nag-feature po sila ng 3 top articles or remarkable articles. At isa po yung article ko sa napili for that particular issue. So medyo extensive na po yung ating yung experience ko sa pagsusulat ng scientific articles. Pero one very important thing that I would like to highlight po is for this talk, hindi po ito textbook approach na ituturo ko sa inyo. No? So this is actually more about a practical guide on how to write it. Kasi ito po, gaya po ng ginagawa ko dati when I talked about how to write up effective research proposals, ang ginawa ko po, binalikan ko lang din po lahat ng mga science articles na sinulat ko for the past 14 years and kung ano man po yung ano po man po yung mga skills and tips and best practices na in-apply ko sa pagsusulat, yun po yung ituturo ko sa inyo. Ano po, hindi po ito largely kinopya sa libro. Okay, so for today, yun pong ating talk will cover a number of topics. So, for us to learn scientific report, we have to start with the definition of a scientific report. So ano ba siya? And then pangalawa po dyan, ano ba yung iba't ibang klase ng scientific reports? And then yung third part po will actually cover yung basic structure of a scientific report. Ano ba yung concept, ano ba yung common framework? May pattern po kasi lahat yan, depende sa type ng article. And then we'll cap this talk off with some writing tips and best practices. But then a few disclaimers, ano po. So ito po, the content of this talk is intended for a mixed audience. So kung meron po ditong sobrang expert na sa pagsusulat, ano po, you might actually find this quite an exciting kasi ang pagkaka-design po natin ng content ay para po ma-appreciate ng ating mga estudyante at mga guro at the very least po sa high school level. And then secondly po, this is not going to be a language or technical writing course. So hindi ko po kayo tuturuan ng grammar, hindi ko po kayo tuturuan ng syntax. And believe it or not, wala din naman po tayong sobrang strict na guidelines when it comes to syntax or composition na sinusunod kasi ang dami, iba't iba po ang areas ng sciences, iba-iba po ang types ng research, iba-iba po ang publication journals and standards that they're rolling out. So mahirap po kasing turuan kayo ng mga ganun kasi mahirap po kayo yung ikahon. Depende po yan sa kung area kayo magsusulat. Alright. Okay, so to get started, let's define what is a scientific report. So a scientific report, according to the Waikato Library, this is a university in New Zealand. It is a document that describes the process, progress, and or results of scientific progress or scientific research on a given problem. So sabi po, process. So kung paano ba ina-approach ang isang research or kung paano ba nag-perform ng experiments ang mga dalubhasa or ang mga investigators para maintindihan yung isang topic, masagot ang isang research question. So keyword here as well is progress. So progress, kasi meron pong mga tinatawag tayong long-term studies. So yung pong mga investigasyon or mga pag-aaral na hindi nyo po matatapos sa isang attempt lang. Minsan po, these studies could take 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years or 40 years in total. So dito po, sa mga long-term projects po na yan, long-term research activities na yan, every once in a while po, ang ating mga dalubhasa or mga investigators involved in such initiatives, nagpa-publish po sila ng mga articles. So yun po, that's what we call progress or updates. And or yung results. Kasi gaya nga po na sinabi natin, pagdating sa ating pag-experiment sa high school, no, ang intention ng pag-perform ng classroom activities is for us to be able to gather results that we can actually interpret and use to justify an answer or to come up with a conclusion. So yun po yung mga yung basic definition ng scientific report. And then another aspect of it that was added in this definition is that the scientific report might also include recommendations and conclusion of the research. So hindi po kasi scientific report recommendation section, but then depende po sa type ng article, minsan po these should actually be included. Okay, so yung pong ating figures, yung ating workflow dyan sa baba ng slide na pinapakita ko, this is actually to re-emphasize the message of Marty. So research starts with ideation, nagpo-progress to experimentation, and then data processing. So pagdating po ng data processing, mas maiintindihan ninyo, ano bang sense nung experimental results na nakuha nyo? Is that sufficient enough to support your conclusion? And then if that is so, kung kapag sapat na ang datos para makapag-conclude kayo or meron natutunan, quote-unquote natutunan, does it end there? No. So if you decide to become a researcher, parte ng responsibilidad mo ay ang i-communicate or i-share ang lahat ng natutunan mo. And this is actually done through science communication. And scientific reporting is just one form of it. Kaya nga ng pagkakasabi ni Marty. And then yung keyword, communication. Scientific communication, science report, or scientific articles. So this is when you talk about communication, if you go to the fundamentals of communication, dalawang participants po sa communication. It's actually the source of information and the recipient of the information. So before tayo mag-discuss kung ano ba yung abstract, ano ba yung introduction, results, discussion, conclusions, it's very important na alam po natin yung intention. Bakit ba tayo nagsusulat ng scientific article? So let's start with the why. So if you are a researcher, for example, kayo po ay guro at meron kayong team members ng mga estudyante and you're all working together to answer a research question. So kapag nagsulat po kayo ng scientific article, ang main objective nyo doon is to share the information that you during the study and to interpret your findings para po maikalat yung natutunan nyo na, oh, okay, we performed the study. Ito yung natutunan namin. Hopefully, magamit ninyo, no? Ma-apply ninyo sa buhay. But then, when you're writing your scientific article, you actually have to write it in the right language and in a form that is actually understandable and relatable to a broad scope of audience. So bakit ko ba sinasabing broad scope of audience? Kasi ang atin pong mga magbabasa of our scientific articles have different motivations kung bakit ba nila binabasa yan. So unang-una, meron po tayong mga estudyante at mga guro or researchers who would read or who will actually attempt to read your article to gather data and learnings na pwede nilang magamit that they can leverage or use or apply for their own studies. So baka po kung ano yung natapos ninyo sa inyong science investigatory project or sa inyong college thesis, baka gamitin nila yung information na yun to come up with a follow-up to your study. So sila yung magtutuloy ng inyong mga ginawa. So again, kung hindi po ninyo i-report ang inyong naaral ng maayos, eh di baka po these students and teachers or researchers might end up just repeating the exact same things that you did. So, wag po natin gawin yon kasi wag natin sayangan ang resources at ang oras nila. So, i-consider po ninyo na every time that you're writing up as a report, you are contributing something to the scientific community. Yung second naman po, some researchers or readers will go over your article to verify your findings. Kasi nga po, kung sinusubukan nilang kopyahin yung method na ginamit ninyo, usually po, they validate the method by repeating your experiment. So it's very important din po that you write this up in such a way na you will enable them to replicate your result. Diyan po, madalas nagkakaroon ng debate ang mga tao na, binasa ko tong paper na to, sinunod ko yung mga sinabi nila, pero hindi ko ma-reproduce yung results. Either mali sila ng ginagawa or may maling ginawa yung author. So that's the reason why, again, it's very important that you focus on the quality and the level of detail when writing up your scientific article. And then ito po, yung pangatlo naman pong tipo ng mambabasa, which I did not list down here, is those, for example, people like me whose bread and butter is essentially reading up scientific articles kasi scientist po kami. So kailangan po we're updating ourselves. Ano na ba nangyayari sa field? So babasahin namin yan because we're curious, not necessarily because we're interested in pursuing the exact same type of research. So again, kailangan po you actually have to be aware of all these considerations. Hindi nyo po kasi ito isusulat lang just for the heck of writing something up, just for just to actually satisfy a requirement. So kailangan po, when you write a scientific report, you're thinking about, the potential readers of your article. Okay, so again, that is the intention of writing up of an effective scientific article or report. Okay, so before we actually discuss paano ba talaga magsulat ng scientific report, I would just like to briefly go over the different types of scientific reports. So the first of which is an original article. So an original article po, ito usually ang type ng article na sinusulat ng mga researchers or yung sa high school level ating mga science investigatory project investigators, and sa college level naman, if a student's thesis advisor is into publishing their work, usually they publish an original article. So bale ito nga pala pong different types of scientific articles. I actually got this from a medical journal. Kasi po, ang ating medical area, ang mga researchers po natin doon, I believe, are publishing, I think, the most diverse types of scientific reports. So, we're casting a very wide net here para makita po ninyo ano ba yung iba-ibang klase. Okay, so case reports, so for example, kung ikaw ay doktor at encounter ka ng isang pasyente at yung kanyang kaso, for example, ng paano ba to? For example, yung case niya ng COVID ay iba yung symptoms. Sometimes they actually publish single case reports. Technical note naman po. So this is actually more of a description of a new technique. So paano ba kapag merong nag-say to detect malaria or or bagong equipment na magagamit para mag-scan ng mga buto. Typically, they actually write up technical notes. So pictorial essays naman po, so this is actually communicating or sharing some of your learnings from your research using images and captions. So ito naman po, typically, these are shorter types of reports. It's more a visual than a narrative. And then, yun pong isang madalas nyo siguro may encounter whenever you're trying to review the literature for your research is review article. So a review article is an analysis of developments on a specific topic. So for example po, ngayon yung hot topic is actually COVID. So since COVID-19 came up sometime like early or late 2019, I believe, siguro po may mga scientists kayo na nagko-compile ng lahat ng developments over the past year and a half about COVID research. So current understanding about that, state-of-the-art treatment. So yun po, you're essentially reviewing yung recent developments reported in the literature. So not necessarily na pag sinulat kayo nito, hindi kailangan meron kayong results. So you're just reviewing, you're compiling recent developments in a form na pag binasa ng inyong mga readers, yung 10 pahina po nung inyong review, for example, meron na silang ang general idea, ano na ba yung recent development. So yung 6th type naman is what we call a commentary. So typically po, when there are certain topics of interest or medyo may trendy na topic for research, some researchers would actually write up commentary. So talking about their personal experience about a particular topic. Yung 7th type naman is editorial. So ito po medyo, this is more of a critique or short review of an article. So sometimes po, when scientists or researchers don't agree with with results of reported in a particular article, sometimes they communicate these critiques via an editorial. So, and then lastly, letter to the editor po is about comments naman and positions on certain topics. So this may not necessarily be, about a specific research. This could actually be, like hot topics or burning questions that which are within yung ating mga scientists are sometimes being asked to provide their feedback or position or to express their positions. Okay, so for today, hindi po natin papasadahan yung 8 yan kasi isang buong araw po yung gugulin ito. But we're gonna be focusing on original articles kasi ito naman po ang actually most relatable to most high school and college investigators. Kasi again, science investigatory projects and thesis. And for us to be able to write a scientific report or an original article, we actually have to start with the dissection of a scientific report. So ano ba yung critical part? Ano ba yung basic structure of a scientific report? Ano ba yung critical elements that should actually critical parts that should be present in there? And then it doesn't stop there. So pag nalaman niyo, okay, this is an introduction. This is the results section. This is the materials and methods. This is your discussion. It doesn't end there, ano po? Kasi yung isa po ko pong na-observe reviewing write-ups of high school and Filipino college students in the Philippines, since wala din po talagang basic training sa atin sa writing, ano po, minsan po they just populate those sections just for the heck. Medyo aimless po yung paglalagay ng information. So yun po hopefully yung mabago natin dito, ano. Tuturo po natin sa inyo how these individual parts of a scientific paper, if you get to write them the most effective way, the sum of it all will actually result in a fairly compelling story. So essentially, yun naman po kasi in layman's terms, kahit po tawagin niyo yung scientific article, nagkukwento po kayo dyan. And paano ba kayo magawa ng, paano ba kayo magkwento? In such a way na you will not, hindi nyo lang po nasusulat kung ano yung natutunan nyo or yung data na nag-gather nyo, but then you're actually educating your readers. And dito na po papasok, what critical information do you actually need to provide to write up a compelling scientific report? Okay, so ito yung basic structure. So this is like yung anatomy or framework of a scientific article or of an original article. So kahit po magbasa kayo ng siguro mga 100 original articles, ito po usually ang sections na present. So the first of which is the abstract, followed by some of the basic components represented by the acronym IMRAD. So IMRAD, I stands for introduction, M for methods, R for results, A and siningit lang. And then D for discussion. And then IMRAD is usually followed by a conclusion section. And then optionally, some researchers include, feature works, and yung references naman po hindi siya optional kasi it's actually one of the prime requirements whenever you are writing up a scientific report. Okay. So nilista po natin yan. But ano na ba yung purpose ng mga sections na yan? So yung abstract, first and foremost, provides an overview of your study. Introduction naman, it focuses on the research question. So para po sa ating mga guro at sa mga estudyante, hindi kayo nagsusulat ng introduction para lang meron kayong madagdag na words sa scientific report. May rason yan. So ultimately, your introduction emphasis or should actually present to your readers why you are doing or like the questions that you're trying to answer. Methods naman is the study approach. So, okay, meron kang tanong na gustong sagutin, how do you get to the answer? Ano ba yung mga ginawa nyo para makakuha kayo ng sagot? Results naman is about findings. So after you performed your experiments, after you performed all the processes necessary, ano ba yung mga natutunan nyo? Ano ba yung data na nakuha nyo? And then, every time you perform an experiment, you gather data. It doesn't end there. You have to interpret. You have to make sense of numbers or observations that you gathered. So dito na papasok yung interpretation of your findings. So from data, it becomes information. So doon na yun papasok sa discussion section. And then lastly, conclusions. It's highlighting and summarization of all your learnings. And then future work, it's about recommendation. So how do you actually improve upon the learnings from this study? So for if ever yung readers inyo again gusto nila mag-follow up study, how can they improve what you have come up with? Okay, and then as early as now, again, bago po tayo dumako doon sa pagsusulat ng IMRAD, for example, I would like to emphasize the fact that yung pagsusulat nyo lang po ng basta-basta na, okay, I am investigating this without textualizing or substantiating your statements, medyo laylayan. Hindi po siya engaging basahin. So more likely kapag hindi po impactful ang inyong pagkakasulat, kapag walang masyadong substance, kapag walang masyadong laman ng inyong mga statements, usually po hindi yan babasahin ng mga tao, ng inyong reader. So how do you actually strengthen your message? Yung pong concepts or information that you are highlighting in all of these sections, pwede po yung i-boost with information that you get from the review of literature. Ang gusto ko pong sabihin sa inyo, pag magsusulat kayo ng introduction, kailangan nyo rin mag-review ng literature kasi kailangan nyo dagdagan yung inyong mga statements ng basehan. Okay, for example, I'm trying to answer this research question. Yung review of literature po, it'll enable you to establish bakit mo ba gusto yung tanong? Bakit mo ba gustong sagutin yung tanong na yan? Ano bang kahalagahan ng tanong na yan? Okay. But sa methodology, study approach, bakit mo pinili yung method na yan? Ikaw ba, inimbento mo ba yan on your own? At kung hindi mo inimbento yan, bakit ka confident na gamitin yan? So kukunin nyo na naman po yun doon sa review of literature. So results naman po, okay. So sometimes, ito nilagay ko kailangan ng review of literature, but then typically, we usually infuse the review of literature kapag po ang results at discussions ay combined. Kasi meron pong formats or forms ng scientific articles wherein yung results and discussions are actually combined into one section, but it is also very important. Sometimes po it's important for you to highlight, okay, if you're using a statistical method to process your data, sometimes you also have to mention, okay, ano ba yung mga references, saan mo ba nakuha yun? And then lastly, and most importantly, when it comes to your discussion, when you interpret your data and you try to extend it over and relate it to, say for example, a fundamental science concept, paano mo gagawin yun? Kung wala kang review of related literature, kung wala kang basehan, hindi naman po pwedeng yung sabihin na I feel like or siguro. Medyo kapag ganun yung pagkakasulat ninyo ng inyong statement sa scientific article, it's a weak statement. Hindi po yan paniniwalaan ng mga magbabasa. So again, an effective review of related literature is something that you should be exercising when you are writing all of these sections. Okay. So good na tayo. And then so hihimayin po natin yung lahat ng sections na yan, but then one very important po that I would like to emphasize is the fact that bibigay tayo ng examples. Ano po? Kasi mas tatatak to mga tinuturo namin sa inyo if we provide some examples. But then yung example po na gagamitin ko is the exact same example that I covered during our webinar on how to write an effective research proposal. So ito, may continuation kasi from research proposal, original article na may results na dadagdagan natin. But then, disclaimer ulit. This is a hypothetical example. Huwag niyo po itong gagawin for research sa inyo kasi ito po ay, again, just for the purpose of exemplification. Hindi po ito namin inire-recommend na gagawin po ninyo. So don't perform or don't adapt like the information that we'll use to for the examples for running experiments at home. Huwag niyo po itong gagayahin. Ano po? Okay. So, first part, summary or abstract. It's an overview of the study. So, gaya po ng sinabi ko, if you would refer back to the training course on how to write an effective research proposal, merong tatlong basic sections sa isang abstract. So the first of which is a very brief discussion or brief mention of the background. So what problems need to be solved or what questions need to be answered, and then what has been done before. So typically po we dedicate 1 to 2 sentences lang for that part. And then secondly is the problem statement. So what specific questions are you proposing to answer, or what specific questions have you answered in this study? And then the third part here is key results. So a summary of your conclusion. So usually we limit an abstract to about 300 words po in length. So kapag medyo mas humaba na dyan, medyo hindi na siya maganda. It's quite taxing. Kasi again, intention. Ang una pong binabasa ng readers is the abstract. Kapag hindi nila nakita yung gist or yung main message of the article, sometimes hindi na po nila babasahin yan. Yeah, medyo ganun po. Kasi minsan, for example, this morning po, I had to read 200 abstracts for a particular project. And so papasadahan ko lang po yung abstract na yun. Kapag hindi ko nakukuha yung keywords or yung key ideas that I'm looking for, then obviously hindi ko po siya babasahin kasi I only have so much time in the day for me to read the article. So again, yung abstract po, at yung abstract po yung unang lumalabas when you do database searches. Kapag na-search ka sa Google Scholar or SciFinder or other scientific article databases, ito, like most of the search engines would spit out the title, the authors, and the abstract. So again, write your abstract properly. Okay, and this is an example. So again, yung ating hypothetical scenario, you were synthesizing gold nanoparticles using several synthetic methods. So for example, yung napakita po dito, it's a reaction between silver chloride and sodium citrate to make size-controlled nanoparticles. So this is just an example po of some of the statements that I hypothetically would write if I were performing this. So the study is about development of anti-cancer treatment drugs. So una-una, so cancer has been a leading cause of death. So kung makikita niyo po dito, you started with a very broad statement, and then after that, you can follow it up with the development of metal nanoparticles as anti-cancer drugs as an active area of research. So from cancer, which is a very broad topic, you actually narrow it down by talking about anti-cancer drug development. And then yung pangalawa po niyan, it's followed by a problem statement. So this study identified cost-effective synthetic routes to gold nanoparticles and explored effect, size, and morphology on anti-cancer activity. So nandun na yung objective nyo. Ano ba yung sinusubukan mong gawin? Gagawa daw po ng murang anti-cancer drug, and then titingnan gumagana ba siya sa pag-prevent ng cancer. Okay, and then the last part here talks about, again, specifics of the proposed study, hypothesis, and general objectives. So light-mediated synthesis of gold nanoparticles is a potentially cost-effective synthesis process, for example. So dun ka na nagbabanggit ng specific approach, or specific synthetic strategy. And then lastly, you talk about nanoparticles with sizes between meters, most effective anti-cancer agents based on in vivo study. So nandun na pumasok na yung scope ng inyong study. So if you notice, from a very broad statement, you're actually narrowing it down or deductively talking about your approach papunta na dun sa specific scope ng inyong study. So ganyan po yung approach. So hindi po pwedeng sobrang puro broad statement hanggang sa matapos na yung abstract. Hindi po yan papatusan or hindi yan masyadong babasahin ng inyong ng readers. Okay. So we move on to the introduction. So the introduction, so aside from the abstract, so the introduction is the second thing that your readers will try to scrutinize. So what is an introduction? So an introduction is essentially the conceptual framework of your studies. So it presents the study context and motivation. So ano ba yung area of the study? What particular challenge are you trying to address? What's your motivation behind it? Ano ba yung importance na nakita mo that encourage you to pursue this research topic? In the introduction as well, we try to explain relevant theories and knowledge. So dito na papasok again, sabi nabi ko, review of literature. Ano ba yung pagkaintindi sa specific area na yan? Meron bang controversy that your research can actually help clarify? So yung po yung mga bagay na yan, you try to incorporate them in your introduction in such a way na as you continue to read your introduction, nare-realize ng mga tao, mahalaga nga natingnan natin to. And then as they read more into the introduction, makikita na okay, itong question na to, dapat talaga itong masagot. And it's good that these people decided to investigate that. So again, your introduction should lead to your research question. And then typically we cap or we conclude the introduction by stating the study objectives and the scope. So again, ano yung gusto ninyong i-achieve dito sa research na to? And then secondly, ano ba yung scope? Kasi again, hindi niyo po pwedeng aralin lahat ng aspeto or lahat ng challenges when it comes to a particular topic. And then again, yung three main parts po dito, it's the background, and then your review of literature or related studies, and then the hypothesis and the study scope. Okay, a few tips. So write the introduction conscientiously and coherently. Okay, so pag sinabi natin coherently, kailangan smooth yung inyong pagkakakwento. For example, kapag po kayo ay nakikipagchismisan, so yan yung pinaka-relatable na example na pwede kong magawa. Pag tinanong kayo ng inyong kumare or inyong kabarkada, ano ba itong ginawa mo at bakit mo ba ito ginawa? At ano yung mga dahilan kung bakit mo inaaral ng isang bagay? Dapat po ganoon yung pagkakakwento. Para lang po kayong, the introduction is you sharing what got you interested in the topic, bakit nyo gustong aralin yan, and then ultimately makumbinsin nyo sila na okay, basahin mo pa yung mga kasunod kasi maganda yung intention namin, maganda yung approach namin, may basihan yung aming objective. So basahin mo yung mga kasunod, basahin mo yung data. That's actually the role of the introduction. And then kung paano po ninyo din na design yung introduction, dapat po yun yung magiging basehan ng inyong mga konklusyon. So, the beginning of the article is ultimately connected to the end of the article. Okay, so yun po yung again sasabihin ko, hindi nyo lang sinusulat to just for the heck of writing it up. May connection po ito. Yung design or sequence ng concepts sa inyong introduction ultimately should be answered by your conclusion. So again, pag pangit ang introduction nyo, hindi yan babasahin. Hindi i-approve for publication ng inyong sinulat. Okay. Again, so ito po, pinapakita ko na naman, whenever, gaya ng sinabi ko kanina sa abstract, whenever you're writing an introduction, the flow of concepts and the type of concepts that you're mentioning should follow an inverted pyramid structure. So essentially, from broad topics, you're narrowing it down as you go. So again, kasi pag nakipagchismisan po kasi kayo sa inyong mga kapitbahay, hindi naman kasi yan yung ano nang ginawa mo, hindi ka naman didiretso sa ito i-design ko tong experiment na to, magpapasimula ka muna, bakit? Anong relevance niyan sa buong grupo, di ba ganoon po? Okay, so you start with the background. So what is the research about? Are there literature information that can help define the problem? Ano ba ang relevance? Bakit ba importante yung inyong ginagawa? Okay. After that,
ibalik nyo na yung batcha doon sa
okay.
PR ni Lola.
Okay. Okay. So, kasunod po nun, you start, like with your first paragraph is typically the broad topics. You're defining the area of interest. Ano ba yung broad questions that got you interested in the topic, and then after that you follow it up with two or three paragraphs po where you bring in related literature. So ano ba yung conventional knowledge? Ano ba yung naiintindihan ngayon sa area? Ano ba yung lingering questions pa rin na hindi pa nasasagot? Yun po, dyan yun ipapasok. So, if ever po, you can still mention literature not necessarily will show that your study is just a follow-up. Okay? But then, okay. All right. So, medyo all right. So JP, can you see my talking presentation mode again?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, it's my mom. Okay. So please ignore that. All right. So, and then after that, you follow it up. So, kung meron po kayo mga related literature po na hindi not necessarily are supporting, or that doesn't establish the fact that itong study nyo ay follow up lang sa inyong sa prior study, you can also use related literature to highlight the fact na ay bago tong ginagawa namin. Wala pang tumingin dito, wala pang nag-investigate, wala pang nag-perform ng experiments to answer these questions. You can also put them there po. So to highlight the novelty, bago itong ginagawa namin, ang talino namin, wala pang nakaisip nito. So those are some of the very important information from the literature that you have to highlight in your introduction. Okay, and then again, typically we cap the introduction with a statement of your hypothesis, your objective, and the study scope. So ito po, dito na again papasok. Pag nabasa na yun, typically pag binasa niyo po yung last paragraph ng inyong introduction, may idea na kayo kung ano yung ginawa nila, kung ano yung scope ng kanilang study. Okay, let's move on to an example. So for example po, dun pa rin sa ating gold nanoparticle synthesis, ang background, so cancer remains to be one of the leading causes of deaths in the world. Development of cheap and effective anti-cancer drugs can significantly decrease cancer deaths, and then reports reveal that gold nanoparticles have promising anti-cancer properties. So dun pa lang po sa background yun na yun, talking about cancer, nag-transition, but at the end of it, alam nyo na ay, okay, ang gagawin nila, they're actually focusing on gold nanoparticle synthesis anti-cancer drugs. And then after that, you follow it up with mentions of specific studies in the literature. So for example, several studies indicate that size uniform transition metals within the 5 to 10 nanometer size range are more effective anti-cancer drugs. So may na-mention na po kayo doon na design element. Size, kailangan pala 5 to 10 nanometers. Ano? And then pangalawa, recent advances in nanoparticle synthesis methodology suggest that cheaper precursors and milder conditions can be employed. So pwede palang gawing mura yung pag-synthesize ng mga nanoparticles kung gahanap ka lang ng tamang chemicals, reagents, at conditions. And then, pagdating na po dun sa dulo ng inyong introduction, you can cap it with your study objective. So this study explored the synthesis of size uniform, 5 to 10 nanometer gold nanoparticles, and their evaluation as anti-cancer drugs. So again, dun sa top part na you were able to discuss kung ano ba yung relevance, anong inyong ginagawa, you were able to mention some prior studies that led you to become interested. Bakit ba 5 to 10 nanometer nanoparticle sizes ang gusto natin gawin? So, ganyan nyo po dapat dinedesign ang inyong introduction. And again, hindi lang po yan space filler na magsasite na lang ako ng gantong article. Kailangan po yung mga information na sinasite ninyo ultimately will help and emphasize or reinforce your study objectives and the scope. So yung second sentence po dito, the study focused on the use of gold nanoparticles prepared via cost-effective methods. So again, doon pa din po you're talking about yung scope and of your study kasi nag-focus kayo dun sa mura. Okay. So, yung third part naman is what we call the materials and methods. So, ang tawag po dito sa ibang klase ng articles is the experimental. So this describes the materials and experimental procedures employed in your study. So, for example, dito po sa ating case na to, so you have to talk about sample preparation. So yung nanoparticles, how did you prepare that? Specifications of the materials and instruments used. So ay gumamit ako ng sodium chloride. Minsan po, yung assay na gagamitin nyo, if you're using it for an experiment, you also have to talk about yung mga supplier. Yung mga ganong detalye po. And there's a reason for that. Experimental techniques. Paano nyo ba pinaghalo-halo yung chemicals, for example? Paano nyo ba inassemble yung robot if you're doing such an experiment or study? Sample size or number of replicates, which is also very important. Kasi sabi nga po ni JP kanina, when you're coming up with conclusions, you have to be confident with your data. So, paano ka makakapag-come up ng strong conclusions kung ang inyo pong data quality ay hindi ganun kataas. So these are things that you have to mention in the section as well. Experimental conditions, variables that you studied. So for example, if you are trying to come up with, say, like a better way to bake bread, ano ba yung mga variables that you can actually tune para mas ma-optimize pa yun or to come up with a new baking technique. Control experiments rin. So kailangan po dito yung i-detalye nyo rin yan na para maging confident tayo sa ating data at hindi extraneous or hindi ang ating observations is not because of interferences. You also have to mention those things here. Okay, nga po, mas maiintindihan nyo to if we will talk about examples. But before we go to that specific contextualization, a couple of tips po. Okay, so materials and methods should actually be detailed enough that kapag binasa po yan or when it's read by other researchers, they can perform the same experiments at the same level of detail, and then ultimately they should be able to replicate your results. So kung kayo po ay nagsusulat ng materials at methods and you're hiding some details of it, you're actually doing a disservice to the scientific community because kung hindi naman po ito patent, we're talking about publicly accessible research, kailangan po transparent kayo. Kung ano yung ginawa nyo, isulat nyo dyan. Kasi for you to be able to build a reputation that you are a reliable researcher, then the people do replicate your results. And then, yung sinabi din kanina ni JP, since ito po ay report na ng natapos na study, you must write the materials and method in the past tense. So sa research proposal ko, future tense kasi hindi nyo pa nagagawa yung eksperimento. Sa scientific report po, past tense na kasi nagawa nyo na. Okay? Okay. So himayin po natin, for example, gagawa tayo ng gold nanoparticle. Ang sabi dun sa ating study statement kanina is that, okay, we have to find the cheapest way to come up with the gold nanoparticle. Hopefully, gawa kayo ng kapag na-maximize niyo yung yields ng 5 to 10 nanometers, iti-test niyo for anti-cancer property. So, ano ba yung mga information that you have to include when you write the materials and methods for this type of study? So, first is specify the reagents and materials used, experimental techniques. So, yung po mga information na sinabi ko kanina. And then, since you're synthesizing a material, you also have to talk about characterization methods. So, paano mo malalaman na nakagawa ka ng 5 to 10 nanometers na gold nanoparticles? So, you also have to talk about how you confirm that. And then lastly, the end goal here is to test their anti-cancer property. How are you evaluating that particular bioactivity? So, again, hihimayin natin yan. So, so when yung first part, synthesis. So you have to talk about your reagents and instruments that you use. So when sinabi po namin that you have to provide the details about your reagents, you have to talk about yung purity. So for example, if you're using gold chloride, is it 99.99% pure? Is it 98% pure? Is it reagent quality? Yung mga ganyang bagay po, you have to specify that. And the usual mark of a very good researcher is that, when they talk about purity, they also identify the manufacturer. Kasi nga po, sabi namin, pag sinulat nyo to, dapat, kung nagsulat kayo ng paper at mag-decide akong i-replicate yung study nyo, edi bibilhin ko rin yung same purity from the same manufacturer. That way, sigurado ako na pag pinerform ko ang experiment the exact same way, I can expect na yung result na nakuha nyo, makukuha ko rin. So, ganun po yun. Pangalawa, type and size of glassware. So, ito po mga bagay na to, hindi po to trivial, So, pag gumamit kayo, for example, ng 500 ml round bottom flask, you have to specify that as well. Kasi some of these design elements of your experiment, they matter. So, wag niyo po itong iti-trivialize. Down to the deep, to the tiniest details po, sometimes they count. Kasi again, some of these could influence the outcome. Lab apparatus and equipment use. So, for example, what heating mechanism did you employ? Did you use a heating mantle? Did you use a Bunsen burner? Gumamit po ba kayo ng kahoy dyan? For example, nagsiga po ba kayo? So you have to specify those things para again, pag kinopya ko yung experiments nyo, makukopya ko rin yung inyong results. Okay. So, synthesis, experimental techniques. So, for example, when you're synthesizing gold nanoparticles, there's a number of different techniques that you can employ. But you have to specify that. So for this example, this researcher employed hydrothermal synthesis. So essentially, you have you perform the synthesis in an aqueous environment. So ang solvent niyo po ay tubig, and then you use heat to decompose the reagents for them to form nanoparticles. There's also another technique called colloidal synthesis. So typically, pagdating po dito, organic solvent, hindi tubig ang gagamitin ninyo. So you also have to specify the fact that, okay, we chose these synthetic techniques and you have to identify may specific name ba yung synthesis method na yan. Number of replicates. So since we are trying to come up with the best way to synthesize these materials, kailangan confident ka na, okay, if I perform colloidal synthesis, if I do it 3 to 5 times, if I do the same experiment 3 to 5 times, the outcome should actually be quite consistent. So again, kailangan natin i-specify ito. Experimental condition, you are synthesizing, so may concentration effects dyan. Ano ba yung tamang concentration ng gold reagent? Anong tamang concentration ng inyong organic reducing agents? Manner of addition. Ano bang ginawa nyo? Yung bang silver chloride, ini-add nyo ba sa sodium citrate? Or the other way around? Or pinagsabay nyo ba ng pag-add? Yung mga ganyan bagay, again, you have to specify these things. Reaction time. Gano'n nyo katagal ginawa yung reaction? 5, 10, 20 minutes, 24 hours, 7 days? You have to specify those things. Temperatures. Stirring rate, so yung pong kung meron kayong stir bar, kung meron kayong magnetic stir plate, kailangan po, ano ba yan, 2,000 rotations per minute ba? Is it 200 rotations per minute? So some of these things that, or some of these factors that could affect the result, you have to specify them. Okay? Okay, another aspect. So pag nagawa mo na yung nanoparticles, you have to confirm, are you making the right size? 5 to 10 nanometers pa? Size uniform ba? Kanihan ba ng inyong mga products ay nandun sa size range yun? Or is it more of a statistical distribution? So in the materials and method section, you have to talk about your characterization method. So for example, since you're synthesizing material and you're using it for some bio activity measurements, you have to also be sure of the purity. So how do you measure the purity of, say, gold nanoparticles? So you can employ elemental analysis or compositional analysis, and those are broad terms. So you have to specify, oh, did you perform combustion analysis? Did you use TGA? Did you use inductively coupled plasma, atomic emission spectroscopy? So some of those things you have to specify, even yung model ng unit na ginagamit po ninyo to analyze these samples. So nanoparticle size, did you use imaging? Anong type ng imaging? Did you use scanning electron microscopy? Did you use tunneling electron microscopy? Did you use a specific statistical method to measure size and size distribution? So yung mga ganyan bagay po, you have to provide them these details in your materials section. And then when it comes to your evaluation, say, of bioactivity, say anti-cancer property, you also have to specify, ano ba yung method of investigation ninyo? Did you do in vivo studies? Anong type ng cells ang ginamit? Or do you use animal cancer cells? Do you use human cancer cells? And even within those types of cells, you have to specify, is it breast cancer cell? Is it prostate cancer cell? So again, mga detalye po kailangan ninyong i-provide sa materials and methods. Okay, materials and methods. After that, may idea na po sila ano ba yung approach na ginawa ninyo for the study. And then this section is typically followed by the results section. So the results section presents the study findings in a meaningful form. So pag sinabi pong meaningful form, hindi po yan yung parang diary na yung step 1, ito yung step 1, ito yung step 2, ito yung results sa step 2. So you have to present your data in a meaningful form. So kasi po limitado ang space niyo sa isang scientific article, so you have to be able to summarize your data in a way na madaling makikita ng inyong mga magbabasa or your readers what the result is all about. So you can actually summarize your data in the form of a table, using graphs, using images, or for more advanced types of characterization, sometimes spectra. So may mga signals po kayo na tinitingnan doon. And typically, in the results sections, you briefly like what the result about, and then dun po sa mga short statements na yun describing like the highlights of your results or some of your results, you typically refer to the tables and graphs and the data summary that you presented. So again, depende po kasi sa requirement, no? There are some articles that limit you when it comes to yung length ng inyong article. So there could be some related or extraneous observation or data that you generate that you might baka po hindi niyo masama, you might not actually be able to include in the discussion. But then typically we move those information or data into appendix section. You don't have to force all the data into the results section, lalo na po kung medyo unrelated siya or hindi po siya masyadong nakakontribute talaga dun sa inyong mga natutunan. Okay. So, in the form of a table, so ito po for example, so ang sabi natin kanina, mag-screen tayo ng dalawang synthesis methods, colloidal and hydrothermal. So, you can summarize some of the data na hindi niyo po pwedeng i-present in the form of a graph. Kasi for example, if you're comparing two different methods, you actually have to provide details about like the that you use, the yields, selectivity to the right size. So ano bang percentage ng product ang 5 to 10 nanometers, and then the shape of your nanoparticle, so globular and place. Kapag medyo verbal po yung, kapag medyo what to call this, qualitative yung ibang mga description, sometimes hindi mo siya pwedeng i-force na maging graph. So sometimes you can actually, it's the most suitable way of summarizing them would be in the form of a table. And sabi ko nga, you actually have to be able to provide a title for that particular table. So in this case, comparison of yields and size selectivity of gold nanoparticle synthesis methods. And then dun po sa inyong narrative part na results, you actually should write 1, 2, or 3 different sentences talking about, or giving an overview of, like what the results are about. So again, depende sa format ng inyong results. So minsan it's an overview. Sometimes you can actually go line by line. Okay, so colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate afforded a higher yield of 5 to 10 nanometer gold nanoparticles. And then after that, you can follow it up. What makes the other method different? So again, when you discuss specific results, if you can tie them up or refer to specific graphs or figures, typically mas maayos yung pagbabasa kasi nare-relate po ng mga nagbabasa kung ano bang figure yung dapat nilang tingnan para mas maintindihan nila. Kasi sabi nga nila dati kanina is minsan ang mga tao ay visual learner. So sometimes if you have to point them to a picture for them to much better understand the sentence, you have to lead them to such visual aids. So for example naman, this is a figure showing the size distribution of gold nanoparticles that you can produce via colloidal synthesis. So you present the data in the form of a graph. So sa halip na table, you can summarize things kasi dito makikita nyo, okay, ang target mo is 5 to 10 nanometers. So makikita mo na yung frequency ng 5 to 10 nanometers in comparison to the other sizes of nanoparticles, doon pinakamataas ang frequency. So that means na, okay, na-achieve niyo yung target. Mataas yung yield ng target size niyo. And then, sa discussion naman, under optimal conditions, colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate gave the highest yield of gold nanoparticles within the desired size range of 5 to 10 nanometers. And then you refer to figure 1. Okay. Additional example, so sabi ko nga, pagka-form nyo ng nanoparticle, paano nyo ba malalaman if it formed the right size and shape? So kailangan nyo ng imaging. So this is an example of how you can actually use pictures to present your results. So again, this is a TM images of gold nanoparticles produced via the said synthetic method. And then again, in the results section, you actually have to describe that and refer to that figure. So again, and one very important aspect rin is you don't put tables and figures in your results section kung hindi po ninyo siya i-discuss. So don't put anything on your scientific article that you're not gonna talk about in the discussion. So kasi po malilito lang ang inyong mga magbabasa. Okay. Okay, discussion section. So the discussion section presents the interpretation of the study results. So again, kung yung inyong sa result section, you talk about size 5 to 10 nanometers. Pagdating sa discussion section, you as a writer should try to explain why. Bakit siya nag-form ng 5 to 10 nanometers? If in your result section, you also presented the fact that, say, ang shape ng gold nanoparticle na nakuha mo ay globular. Why? So, dito na papasok yung synthesis part. You observe something, you have to explain why that is so. And how do you actually effectively interpret your data? So again, dito na naman po papasok yung review of literature. So again, ito papasadahan ko po yung mga talking points dito. So the discussion should actually state the study findings and their interpretation. So do the data that you generate, do they support your hypothesis? If your answer is yes and no, that should be followed by of justification as to why or why not your data support your hypothesis. So again, sa discussion section po, you have to compare and contrast your learnings or your data with priorly published reports. So again, dapat nagbabasa kayo. mahirap po siya ma-imagine ngayon, no? Pero sa example mamaya makikita nyo. The information and a firm review of related literature should help you establish your confidence in your results. So again, if you talk about, say, okay, we adapted the synthesis method, say, from this particular group. Gano'n pa tayo ano ba yung margin na ni-report nila? Kung medyo, if they perform multiple trials of that at yung precision ay medyo mataas, then magiging confident sila na ay kahit 3 beses lang ginawa nitong researchers na to, sa ginamit nila ay well-established method according to the literature, edi magtitiwala po sa inyo ang mga nagbabasa. Okay, support study conclusion. So sinabi ko na yan kanina, offer explanations for unexpected outcomes. So yun po, again, this is a practical reminder po to everyone. Kapag nagde-design kayo ng experiment, when you ideate approach sa isang project, hindi po lahat ng inaasahan nyo ay makukuha ninyo. Paano po kung result na nakuha nyo from an experiment is the opposite of what you were expecting? So how do you explain that? So again, you have to consult the literature. And then if you have established the fact that, okay, this is a weird observation, but this is actually never observed before. So a review of the literature will also help you give emphasis to the fact that this is never before been observed type of outcome. Okay, so punta tayo dun sa ating example. So gold nanoparticle synthesis and anti-cancer property evaluation. So sabi dun kanina sa ating results is when we were comparing the two different types of syntheses, so yung colloidal synthesis daw with gold chloride and sodium citrate afforded the highest yields of 5 to 10 nanometer gold nanoparticles. So pag binanggit niyo po uli yun dun sa discussion, ang dapat, you should follow it up with some inputs from the literature. So right after that, sabihin nyo, so this observation is consistent with the study performed by the group of Professor Marty Mateo, where they employed both hydrothermal and colloidal synthesis methods in the synthesis of particles. And then after that, colloidal synthesis allows for controlled growth of metal nanoparticles. So why is this very important? So binanggit po nila dito, synthesis of silver nanoparticles. So silver is actually in the same group as gold. So you could actually expect that they share similar properties. So ito po yung paggamit nyo ng review of literature to justify your interpretation of the data. Ganito pala, kaya pala ganito mag-behave yung gold under colloidal synthesis conditions kasi ganun din pala yung behavior ng silver. Related yung properties nila kasi magka-group sila. So, dyan nyo po ma-elevate yung inyong discussion. Kasi hindi lang siya na-observe ko to. Kailangan may synthesis. Kailangan i-relate nyo yan sa established na scientific, established knowledge about these observations. So again, hindi lang po siya pag-present ng table, i-describe nyo. Ultimately, you have to answer the question why. Why should we believe you? Why is this result believable? Okay? Okay, so for example, second example, dun sa ating result section, we talked about yung selectivity to 5 to 10 nanometers. So sabi, under optimal conditions, colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate, the highest within the 5 to 10 nanometer size range. You can follow it up with a couple of statements, mentioning studies reported in the open literature. So efficient nanoparticle size control was also demonstrated by the group of Professor Pee Oña in the colloidal synthesis of gold nanoparticles using organothiol. So ang pinagkaiba dito, kayo as a researcher, ginamit nyo sodium citrate. Si Professor Pee Oña, ginamit niya ay organosulfur compounds. So ano-observe pala niya ay parehas din. So this suggests that gold and silver nanoparticles undergo a similar nucleation mechanism. So dyan, may explain niya na, okay, 5 to 10 nanometers ang napo-form. Bakit ganun? So siguro yun, may i-relate niya sa effect ng inyong organic reducing agent. So ganyan niyo po siya dapat i-discuss. Again, yun lang babanggitin. Ito na-observe ko and then bahala na mag-interpret ang magbabasa. So kapag ganun po, very weak ang inyong paper. Okay. Another observation, like, or that was mentioned in the result section. So synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate produce globular gold nanoparticles, and then you follow it up with the statement that though the Oña reported similar size distribution. So, observed na Professor J.P. Oña ay 5 to 10 nanometers din. There's a difference. When they used an organosulfur reagent, they observed the formation of cubic gold nanoparticles. And ang ginamit ninyo ay sodium citrate, ang na-form ay globular. So, you actually discovered something new na, oh, kapag pala binago ko ang aking organic reducing agent, parehas ang size pero magkaiba ang shape. Diba? So that's actually how you can use the review of literature to highlight the fact that you discovered something new. Okay, so ano po yan? May ganyan. There's a pattern. There's a pattern in actually how we discuss our results and how we interpret our results. So hopefully po, may nakukuha kayong may nakukuha kayong mga tips kung paano pa siya gagawin. And then, gaya nga po na sinabi ko kanina, if you're writing a full article, the result section is a section of its own, nakahiwala yung discussion. But then if you're writing what we call a communication na para lang po siyang isang diretsong story, wala kayong headings or division ng sections, the results and the discussion sections are combined. So, pero ang mahalaga po is you actually know how to formulate the statements, how you can actually refer strategically to specific data summary, guided. Kumbaga kapag nagkukwento po kayo, kapag nakikipagchismisan kayo, dito na papasok yung visual aids. Okay? Ito yung visual aids, ito yung nakita ko, ito yung interpretation ko. So, ganun din po yan. Para, again, when you're writing up a scientific article, you are just sharing your story. Okay. So, a few more slides and we're almost done. So, conclusion section naman po. So, this is a summary of the findings that answer your research questions and fulfill your objectives. So dito po sa part na to, na gather na natin yung data, na interpret na natin yung ating mga datos into information. This is the part where all come together. So nag-fit na sila. Dito buo na yung inyong story, inyong kwento or your story. But then, the conclusion section should actually be brief. Kailangan maiksi lang to kasi hindi nyo lang po, ito po ay parang, some people write this up as bullet points and enumerate lang nila, okay, ito yung 5 conclusions or 3 conclusions out of this study. So again, highlight lang just to re-emphasize ano bang natutunan nyo. And then optionally, some researchers include or suggestions for follow-up experiments or recommendations on how can improve what they have actually reported. Kasi for example, kung kayo po ay nasa 4th year high school na at gagraduate na kayo, kapag may natapos kayong science investigatory project ngayon that you think should be continued in your school, you should recommend to the next generation of 4th year students or grade 12 students na, okay, if you're gonna perform a follow-up study on this, you should actually do these experiments para mas maganda yung inyong result at to improve our understanding of the topic. So ito po yung sample lang ng conclusion, no? So ito, sinabi ko nga kanina, your conclusions section and subject. So dito, magkabaliktad lang yung approach kasi typically you mentioned the key conclusions first, right? So for example, the synthesis of cheap and size uniform gold nanoparticles was investigated. A colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate gave the desired size at cost lower than commercial processes. Kung makikita niyo po dito, this answers your study objectives. And then after that, in vivo studies with human breast cancer cells revealed that globular gold nanoparticles within 5 to 10 nanometers exhibited anti-cancer properties superior to those of gold nanoparticles with random size distribution. So again, this ties up to like the middle part of your conclusion. And then lastly, optimization of the synthesis conditions are warranted to control nanoparticle properties and influence anti-cancer properties, morphology, size, and shape. So again, yun po, your conclusion should actually answer the questions that you identified in your introduction. Again, magkadugsong po yan, yung beginning at saka yung end ng inyong paper. And then lastly, references. So again, it's very important that we continue fostering our sense of community, and then at the same time integrated po. If you cite some information from other people's studies, you have to reference them. So kung nakita niyo naman po sa slides namin lahat, kahit po yung ibang mga concepts that we mentioned, they're actually general information sections that, you know, like based on experience, you can originally talk about, you know, we still try to reference like sources of information to give them credit, and then at the same time for you to know where to look for, you know, for follow-up materials. And then yung critical, ang references po, it could be books, reports, presentations, discussions, scientific articles. But then when you actually cite information from these different types of scientific articles, meron din po mga critical or mga required elements into it. So you have to mention the author's names, publication years, the title of the article, title of your journal, edition and volume, and then pages. And then hindi po natin papasadahan to, no, kasi ang dami po mga standard formats for citing literature references. So but ang tip ko lang po sa inyo, if you're trying to publish an article in a particular journal, you actually have to follow the standard citation format that publication is prescribing. So kayo po yung aangkop sa kanila. But then again, give credit to where credit is actually due. And then lastly po, I will leave you with some of these tips. No? So sinabi ni JP, medyo related to kanina, less is more. So practice brevity. Hindi po kasi porket marami kayong sinabi or marami kayong words na sinulat ay mas maganda na yon. So sometimes kapag mas maiksi pero mas simple ang language, mas effective yung writing. Kasi again, the purpose of writing is for your readers to understand what you did. And ito po, ako po ay perennial participant sa press conference sa campus journal school. I'll never forget this a statement from Professor Ceciliano Jose Cruz. So natatandaan ko po yan from grade 5. I was into news writing, and essentially scientific writing is just like news writing. You describe things straightly, you know, for what the events for how the events like really transpired. So we write to express and not to impress. Okay, secondly, acknowledge the limits of your study. So dito na po papasok yung sinabi ni JP kanina na your results should be sufficiently supported. Kapag po kayo gumawa ng spaceship at ang naabot lang ng spaceship nyo ay hanggang 1, hindi po kayo gagawa ng conclusion na i-cover nyo hanggang Mars. Ganun po yun. So kung ano lang yung datos na nag-gather ninyo na pwedeng sumuporta sa conclusion, you should stay within that bound. Kasi po, if you make sweeping generalizations or conclusions, typically po, hindi po may impress yung mga tao sa inyo. Kukwestiyonin nga nila na, ay, parang OA naman yung medyo exaggerated yung conclusion nila, hindi naman sapat ang kanilang data. So these are things that you actually have to watch out for. Third, readers. So wala po kasing first time na nagsulat ng scientific report na expert na agad. So ang suggestion ko sa inyo, kung nakukulangan kayo sa abilidad ninyo magsulat ng scientific articles, read a lot. Read and read and read, because it's actually kapag po mas diverse na ang types ng articles na inyong nabasa, ibig sabihin yun, diverse na rin ang writing styles na pwede nyong i-adapt. And then, for beginners, alam ko po na this is actually a very daunting task. Mahirap talaga magsimula. The most difficult scientific article that you will ever write is your first, yung kauna-unahan. But then, again, kailangan maging sobrang daunting. Kailangan strategize kayo. Kailangan utak po kayo dyan. Madiskarte kayo dyan. So, take inspiration from a related published study. So, kung nagsulat kayo ng article about synthesis of bull nanoparticles for anti-cancer properties, maghanap kayo. Meron ba dyan paper about silver nanoparticles? Yun, gaya ng sinabi ko, we cited the studies of Professor Pee Oña and Professor Marty Mateo. And then you learn from the example that they said. And then, ultimately, practice makes perfect. So, hindi po talaga kayo gagaling sa pagsusulat ng scientific article or pag-communicate ng inyong science ginagawa. So we encourage you to keep reading, listening to presentations. Kung meron pong conferences dyan, attend those conferences kasi marami po kayong matututunan by being part of the scientific community. So be an active part of of the science communication channels po that are accessible to you. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. And again, maraming salamat po. So na-realize ko, sabi ko, kasabay pala to nung show sa Miss Universe. So salamat po sa mga tumutok sa amin. At hopefully po may natutunan kayo. Ano po. Maraming salamat po.
All right. So thank you, Kuya Jeff. I'll take it from here. I'll ask some questions that are posted in our YouTube and Zoom comment section. So marami po dito ang nag-comment na madami daw po silang natutunan. So first question is for Kuya JP, pero pwede ring sumagot si Kuya Jeff. Ano daw po ang pinagkaiba ng abstract and introduction? And is it acceptable to use enumeration type in writing lab reports?
Okay. I think yung dun sa first well, what's the first question? Yung abstract is an executive summary kung tatawagin, because it not only contains the background information, it has the most crucial results presented in the experiment or in the study. Tapos meron kang background information, you have the most crucial results, and you have the ending conclusion. So lahat naka-package po dun sa abstract, because yun yung parang pinaka-glimpse of your study. Dun po sa introduction, that is where you introduce the research question. Okay? So, and as such, dun po nilalagay yung background information pa lang. And then from the background information, dun tayo nag-derive ng hypothesis dun sa gagawin nating experiment. So yun lang po yung coverage ng introduction, as opposed to the abstract, which is basically an executive summary nga po nung buong study.
And would you recommend to have an enumeration type for lab reports?
Yeah, for the sake of clarity siguro of presentation, you can use that, but we also try to practice technical writing among our students. So kung bullet points yan, hindi natin makikita yung well, say grammar or yung tamang format ng ano. Although pwede naman siyang i-insert here and there yung bullet points just for the sake of clarity nga po of presentation, but I would recommend to have it in a paragraph form para po mas formal and ma-practice talaga po yung mga estudyante natin.
Yeah, actually if may element of time, kung nagmamadali siguro at kailangan na agad ipasa, pwede yung bullet form. Pero yung bullet form nyo can also serve as your outline. Kasi mas madali nang mag-paragraph form or mag-discuss when you have those important bullets na in-enumerate nyo in your discussion. Jeff, will you...
Yeah, and ito lang no. Essentially sa totoo lang po, wala naman talagang universal format. I've read a lot of papers written first in different areas na ang conclusion po nila enumerated. These are the key conclusions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ganon. So, I mean, it's siguro po magandang training lang if you can teach your students on how to write, like a full narrative na hindi mo kailangan mag-rely sa bullet points or enumeration. Pero technically speaking, hindi po yan bawal. It's okay. And so I guess to serve again to stay to the intention of writing, if enumerating, some of the key points in certain sections is what's gonna help you clearly communicate your thoughts, then by all means do it. Kasi may mga tumatanggap po niyan. Siguro po depende din yun sa, i-check nyo rin po kung ano ba yung mga specifications ng for example, journal publication. Pero siguro at the high school level po, I wouldn't discourage that. It should be fine. Lalong-lalo na po sa first year. Sa mga first year high school students, yung mga bago pa lang nagsusulat, huwag niyo po ipuwersa ang mga bata sa grade 7 na mag-present sa inyo ng ng format na parang parang professionally written. So it's okay po. Baby steps muna. Pero siguro po, i-design niyo na such that pagdating nila naman ng grade 12, dapat naman siguro matuto na sila. Kasi pagdating po nila ng college, pag nag-thesis na sila, ang huhugutan po nila ng experience is from high school. Kasi I believe, nung panahon natin sa UP, wala po kaming formal training course on writing. So, dun din kami humugot. Ako po, I was quite effective at writing mainly because I was a competitive writer. Pero kung wala po nun, mahihirapan din po ako.
Ayan. Thank you, Kuya Jeff and Kuya JP. So, some of the questions from YouTube, ito Kuya Jeff and Kuya JP. Ano pong ideal na duration ng paggawa ng experiment from pre-lab to final report for high school students para di nakaka-overwhelm?
Okay. Siguro ako din sasagot nun, no? Sa amin po kasi sa UP, dati, correct me if I'm wrong, JP and Marty, we perform an experiment on a particular day and then the deadline is actually the week after. Pero yun po, hardcore po yun. Pang college level po yun. So siguro po, yung at least ng 2 weeks. First kasi hindi po kasi mga eksperto pa yan at di pa yan masyadong bihasa sa pag-process ng data. Ang problema po, kapag sobrang immediate yung inyong submission deadline, they won't actually have much time to digest the information. Gaya nga po nung ina-encourage namin dito, pag kayo ay magdi-discuss, kailangan mag-cite kayo ng relevant literature. Kung 1 week lang po yun, magde-data processing sila for a couple of days, wala na po silang masyadong oras para magbasa. So I think ito po, this is like a suggestion po from someone I have taught for at least almost 2 semesters in UP. Siguro po healthy for high school students at least 2 weeks. Pero wag naman pong masyado matagal kasi baka makalimutan naman din nila yung data. So siguro po make it an exercise that in the first week ituro niyo po sa kanila na okay, shortly after you perform the experiments, you have to process the data. Kasi ito, hindi mo pa naman kailangan talaga ng magbasa ng review of literature. Kasi typically sa experiments naman sa high school, meron na kayong mga guides. Paano ba yung calculation, paano ba yung ganyan. But then give them enough time to digest the data and also search for related literature that will help them explain the data. So not too quick, but not too slow. Naman. Yeah, not too long.
Yeah. Kuya JP, would you like to add anything?
Ako, yun lang din ng ang danger kasi pag yung masyado ng matagal because pag ginawa mo yung report, there are certain points na hindi mo na note sa notebook mo.
Yeah.
And it just like completely disappears from your memory. Hindi mo na capture. So, tama yung sinabi ni Kuya Jeff to do the data analysis as soon as possible after the experiment para fresh pa sa utak mo yung mga ginawa nyo and makapture mo yung mga important like points na hindi mo na note sa lab notebook mo. And it's also very important to write everything sa laboratory notebook. Ayun, nakalimutan kong isabihin yun kanina.
Yeah.
Yun.
All right. So, siguro for high school naman, hindi pa ganun ka technical yung discussion na hinihingi for them. So, baka maybe after the experiment, kunwari, Friday yung experiment, pwede ka they need to answer some specific questions after the experiment and then siguro yung formal write-up maybe over the weekend, Monday ipasa na para hindi rin agad makalimutan ng mga students. Alright, so next question, pwede ba gumamit ng schematic diagram or flow diagram to show the procedure? Actually sa amin sa BS Chem sa UP, record yung schematic diagram.
Yeah. So it's
So-
definitely very helpful to do the schematic kasi yun nga po sa amin in UP sa basic chem courses, chem lab courses, yung pong procedure ay in the form of schematics para makita talaga na naiintindihan ng estudyante yung process and yung steps na kailangang i-undertake dun sa experiment. So we definitely recommend that.
Yeah, tsaka mas madali siyang sundan ng mga students if naka schematic diagram. Hindi na sila magbabasa pa ng
Oo.
maraming
Oo.
words.
At saka pag nasa
kita
lab
mo
ka,
na
di ba?
agad yung next step.
Yeah.
And then siguro naalala ko lang, no, you guys mentioned our experiments and lab reports in UP. So yung isang na-appreciate ko po, nung nag-aaral kami nun, at nagsusulat kami ng lab reports, was the fact that our instructors were asking us to identify potential sources of error. Yun po na when you perform a particular experiment, you also have to use your imagination to identify paano ba posible maging mali itong ginagawa ko.
Mhm.
So it's a way of teaching your students to interrogate, okay, pag binigyan ka ng instruction at sinunod mo yan, you also have to be able to question, bakit ko to kailangan gawin? Tama ba talaga to? Yung mga ganong bagay po, you have to incorporate that in your design of experiments, and mahalaga po ni-identify nila yan when they write their lab report. That is actually something po na, for example, sa amin pag nag-abroad kami, doon kami din napupuri that we know how to interrogate. Hindi lang binigyan kami ng instruction ng mga supervisors namin, susundin agad namin. So you should, yun po kasi yung part ng critical thinking while doing experiments that you should develop, like within your students. So mahalaga po yun.
Alright, so last question siguro before mag-end tayo.
Okay.
Siguro
Before ka mag-last question,
from,
pasadahan, JP, Marty, before ka mag-last question, pasadahan ko lang to mga events natin. Okay, so today po is May 15,
Okay.
natapos natin to. But then also today po, kung yung iba po sa inyo ay magbabalak mag-submit po ng entry sa FilSciHub Research University Science din. It's a competition, it's a battle of science investigatory project ideas. The deadline po is up until midnight today sa Philippines, so Saturday, no. And then after that po on May 29th, we do have a lecture po by a seasoned professor, Professor Raymond Monterrey. So will actually teach you guys on how to navigate over the grayscale approach of reasoning in general chemistry. So ito po sa mga guro at sa mga estudyante, napakahalaga po nito. And yung gagamitin yung example dyan is yung bonding in solids. And then on June 5, Professor Dindy Boyles is coming back to introduce you all to the world of alkenes. And then dito po, may challenge po kasi sa aking mga guro at estudyante nun. Paano daw po ba ang reaction mechanism? So, pagbibigyan po namin kayo, we will introduce you to reaction mechanisms in organic chemistry. And then, on June, a talk on green chemistry, specifically on principles and initiatives in green chemistry. That's going to be presented by Professor Katrina Vasquez de Paz of Adamson University. So if you're interested in participating in these events, just go to our official website and to our Facebook page para po makuha nyo yung details on how to participate. And then lastly po, yun pong aming event on teachers po. So we will kick off it's next week on May 22. It's Saturday, by the way, in the Philippines. Medyo disoriented po ako kasi that's Friday evening here. So yung webinar series na to, we're actually hopefully sometime early next week, we will confirm kung yung mga a-attend po nito ng webinar series na to ay makakakuha ng CPD unit. So we're working this out with PNU and with FUSE. So register to this event. We will also present the specifics of this program on that day. Okay.
Last question.
Back to you, Marty. Last question.
All right, last question from Sir from Sir Angelito Atienza. My only question is, the experiment limitation that we impose this time of pandemic is a home basis experimentation. Do you have any other suggested way on how to do observations and experimentations at home, like testing manually the data they needed? For instance, thickness of grass fiber, strength absorption, etc. So, yung iba
I think-
dito can be easily achievable yon. Katulad nung thickness of grass fiber, meron naman kayong ruler, or if you want to buy caliper, meron naman po yan sa Shopee at sa Lazada. So pwede po kayong bumili na. Yung strength, ito medyo mahirap to kasi kailangan mo talaga ng testing machine, universal testing machine to measure the strength required para ma-break yung fiber. For absorptions, meron tayong tinatawag na digital calorimetry na tinatawag. So you can use images to measure the absorbance of your extracts or your solutions. Merong merong software na ang tawag ay ImageJ. So if you can download that, pwede niyang ma-transform into absorption yung mga pictures na kinuha nyo lang. Picturean nyo lang yung solution.
Freeware siya, di ba?
Pwede nyo na agad. Freeware siya, yes. Tas marami kayong pwede makuha doon. Pwede nyo makuha yung color values, yung RGB values, heat values, mga ganyan. Pwede nyo makuha. So marami siya. Kailangan nyo lang talagang aralin yung software. So maraming freewares na ganyan sa internet na pwede nyo i-explore.
Yep. And even pocket microscopes can be purchased from Lazada na, 'di ba, yung mga maliliit na microscopes.
Oo. Yung paper microscopes are actually available din sa Lazada, mga 300 or 400 pesos lang. So pwede
Hindi naman tayo nag-endorse ng Lazada, no, pero ayun.
Oo nga. Pero yun ay award-winning yun yung paper microscope kasi nga parang ang original price talaga niya, ang tawag talaga sa kanya is $1 microscope. Pero dahil sa Pilipinas, galing siya sa US at saka siniship pa po sa Pilipinas, kaya gano'n na yung price pagdating dito. Anyway, for if wala kayo ng mga ganong gamit, stick with the home-based experiments na pwede nyong gawin sa bahay nyo. Like yung mga diniscuss namin sa aming previous na webinars about topics that you go to at home during the pandemic. So hindi yun nagre-require ng kahit anong sophisticated na material. So just plain observations of plant height, plant weight, etc.
Ayun nga lang po, hindi namin kayo mabigyan ng parang exact na experiment on how to do that, pero experiment ideas po. So kindly check po dun sa nagtanong, kindly check po yung past webinar namin on home-based research na si Marty Mateo po yung resource speaker natin. So ayun, marami po kaming natutunan doon na mga research ideas na magagawa niyo po sa bahay. Okay?
All right.
Yes.
Alright.
Yes,
Grabe, 3 oras na naman po kayong tumutok.
Ayan, so I think it's time to wrap up kasi it's already 1 p.m. Any final messages, Kuya Jeff, or announcements, Kuya JP?
Yeah, i-share ko lang tong kasi nagpa-poll ako kanina. So ito hindi na natin mababasa lahat, no? Pero I will leave this in the end slides later, yung mga inputs ng mga teachers natin on how to make doing laboratory reports engaging for students. Meron silang nire-refer na reward system or parang ang tawag dito, educated play. What was that term again, Marty? Parang learning while playing. Ayan. So ayan, i-flash po namin to later. So kindly watch out your names if you're one of the respondents here. So ayan, maraming salamat po.
Yeah, JP, people are already following up on the link.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. Kung may announcement ka pa, I'll just
Kuya Jeff?
quickly post it.
Ito po, ang gusto ko lang sabihin, Yung research university po natin, ito po kasi ginagawa namin is really provide basic training po na fundamentals. Kung napansin po ninyo, hindi po namin kayo in-overwhelm na okay, super technical, kailangan ganito, kailangan social lang pagkakasalita. Kasi ang kailangan po is yung basic competency makuha ninyo. And then based off of that, you can tackle more complex approaches po into writing. And so we encourage you po na ipapanood nyo po ito sa inyong mga estudyante kasi napaka-laymanized po ng pagkakaturo namin sa inyo. Magbasa po kayo ng libro about scientific writing, more likely po mahirap po kasi talaga siyang intindihin. So ito po hinimay po talaga namin ito. So hopefully po ma-spread around niyo po ito with your students and with your fellow teachers kasi ito po talaga yung gaps sa competencies ng ating mga guro at mag-aaral sa Pilipinas, yung tama pong pagsusulat ng scientific article. So hopefully po magawa niyo yan. And then watch out po, kung meron po kaming ganito kalaking program sa Research University, yung teacher training po, starting next week, watch out for that. Kasi ang dami po naming exciting na programs for our teachers. Ang dami po namin kakolaborate ng mga malalaking. So just keep watching out for announcements on our website and also on our Facebook page. So again, maraming salamat po sa pagtutok na naman ninyo sa amin. Isa na naman pong Sabado at isang tanghalian na naman po ninyo ang aming nasakop. Pero we, as usual, we really appreciate your participation and kapag po
And you
ganito
speaking in.
Yeah, and yung pong pagtutok ninyo, hindi po talaga lumaylay yung participation. Mas lalo po kaming ginaganahan. Nasahan po ninyo, bigger things are coming. Gaya ng lagi namin sinasabi, we're first year pa lang po namin na ganito kami ka-active. We are just getting started.
So, thank you, Kuya Jeff. So, ang mga evaluation forms po ay naka-post.
Yep. It's already posted on the YouTube chat and here in Zoom chat.
And Zoom chat box po yung mga evaluation forms.
All right.
Naglalag ba ako?
All right. Maraming salamat po.
Ayan.
Medyo
So,
naglalag na tayo.
with that, we conclude our webinar. Maraming salamat po.
Apo, mag-ingat po kayo palagi.
Matapos na daw tayo. Okay, maraming salamat po. Enjoy your week.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you po.